Are your hamstrings always tight? Do you have a niggling lower back pain that you just can't seem to get rid of no matter how much you stretch? Then this episode is for you. Welcome to the Self-Made Podcast, and on this episode of the show, it is an absolute pleasure to welcome Dr Hassan Zaid on the show. Hassan has been a chiropractor for many years. I first met him when I worked in London, and he was the first person to actually give me a chiropractic adjustment. The guy is incredibly clever, being not only a fantastic chiropractor, but also a competitive powerlifter, and has worked with many athletes, including Olympians, day-to-day office workers, and many other performance bodybuilders and powerlifters. In this episode, we talk about everything that you need to know to learn about movement, why your hamstrings aren't tight, how to think about dysfunction, pain, and movement adjustments, how to pick the right habit for you that's going to not only sort your pain, improve your performance, but take it away for life. We then go in deep into how the brain affects everything from how you move to how you feel, how you perform, and how to put your ego in check to improve both personally, professionally, and via your performance. This is a really fascinating episode, and it's worth every second of the runtime it has. It has generally been one of my favorite episodes that I've ever recorded, and it's been an absolute pleasure to have Hassan on, and I will always welcome him back on the show. If you enjoy this episode of the podcast, please leave a review on whatever your preferred podcast platform is. Share on social medias, tagging myself and Hassan. And if you want to support the show and allow us to do more of this, and allow me to give more of my passion and give more episodes to you, please donate via the Buy Me a Coffee link to support the show directly. But without further ado, I will leave you with myself and Dr. Hassan Zaid. So, Hassan, this has been an interesting episode for pure reason that whenever I have issues, pain, discomfort, my general go-to is to always go to a chiropractor. And you were the first person to ever crack my neck in my life. And I remember walking in to your office in Mayfair at the time and never ever had a chiropractor adjustment before. And I watched enough Die Hard movies in my life to know that when someone does that to your neck and cracks it, you die. And I was completely on edge. And the guy, you're the guy that put me at ease in that and also transformed my opinion on the art itself. So before we go into a little bit about your backstory, for people who don't know you, Hassan Zaid, who are you and what do you do?
Well, it's a very deep question. Who am I? And maybe I'm still answering that question myself. But if you ask what I do, I'm a chiropractor. I'm also a powerlifter. Would you want to know more about what chiropractic is as far as like how I see it?
Because go for it. Yeah.
Chiropractor, you'll have probably your own opinion and maybe assumptions, maybe experience about what a chiropractor is or isn't. But essentially, I mean, and this is a question in itself, because you ask 100 people what a chiropractor is, they're going to give you a different answer. You probably have seen enough videos floating around YouTube and Instagram, TikTok. By the way, I only found out what TikTok was about 6 months ago, which tells you where I'm at with social media.
I'm the same. I don't know what a TikTok is. I don't know I barely know what a cryptocurrency is. I no idea.
I thought TikTok was a video editing app that you just made videos to post on Instagram. I didn't know it was a platform. But nonetheless, I see there's chiropractors out there with like immense following, just cracking people. So a chiropractor is like any other therapist, let's say like a physiotherapist or an osteopath that works with the hands. You're just trying to, with many different possible techniques that are available across all these different professions, there are different ways to implement a chiropractic technique. So the cracking is the adjustments, the hands-on manual manipulations of either spine or peripheral joints, which are, and again, whoever you speak to, you're either trying to improve mobility, reduce pain. If you speak to someone like me, I will use with most of my patients a language that I don't really believe in. And I know that sounds contradictory. I'll tell them this is stuck or not moving, or we're just improving mobility. And the way I actually process the whole thing is that your brain is this computer. This is all neurology at the end of the day. Anything you do to the body is a stimulus, whether it's a chiropractic adjustment, whether it's a stretch, whether it's an exercise, whether it's dry needling, cupping, massage, whatever. Your brain is interpreting the neurology of that input. when you adjust the spine, you stimulate receptors. Mechanoreceptors are the primary stimulus that you're getting to. When you move, you stimulate mechanoreceptors, same as when you do a massage, for example, but there's a higher density of mechanoreceptors in the spine or in joints, because they are the moving structures of the body, and even more so in the spine, than anywhere else in the body. So when you perform a high velocity adjustment, that quick, fast stretch that creates that nice little cracking sound that either scares the hell out of you or gives you that amazing sense of relief that some people love, you're going to get, your brain is going to get a very high stimulus, or what's the word, a strong stimulus of movement, which movement overrides pain receptors. That's one, down regulates pain. So it's just, even in the temporary, you crack something, even if it's not the right area, whatever the right area may or may not be, but let's just say it's some form of stimulus. That's why it makes your pain feel better. It's like when you bang your arm on a desk and you rub it or you shake it, it feels a little bit better. It's just giving movement to the brain to override pain. That's one side. The other side of it is the way I see it is you're trying to reprogram the body's function. So the person is efficient in a particular number of positions or movements. So let's say if I'm sitting at this computer right now, I'm a little slouched. I should be sitting back here, but I'm trying to be visible in the camera. But let's say if you slouch all day long, it's a stimulus still. That posture is a stimulus. It's a low-level stimulus, but nonetheless it's a stimulus, and your brain is memorizing it. Over a period of time, your software will adapt the hardware in your body. So muscles which need to shorten in, let's say, in your chest rolls, your chest shortens when your shoulders roll forward. So what will happen is you're going to get short muscles that are going to be tighter. This is going to lead us to a topic I think we're going to bring up in a minute. Yeah. Your upper back muscles are going to lengthen, and your hardware, so to speak, will adapt to that input, that habit that you're programming. So any and all the movements you perform over time may become dysfunctional when you start to incorporate crappy movements and you spend too much time in one position rather than many positions. I mean, this is another argument away from the idea that there's a single good posture out there and a bad posture, because there's no such thing. There are just too much time spent in one posture and not many postures. So the way I see chiropractic, is a very long way to answer your question.
It's good though. Go for
it. I'm not really good at sticking to the point. I drift off very quickly. So if you want to pull me back in at any moment, do so. So what I see myself as a chiropractor is I am someone who looks for solutions for physical pain and mechanical problems to help someone better their quality of life, be it through pain alone, which is, to be honest, pretty boring. And that's actually the easy part. But nonetheless, it's what most people come to you with being their number one priority. And then two, which is what interests me far more, is improving the function and capability of a person physically. So let's say you can extend that to a particular sport. It might be a strength sport or bodybuilding or just running a marathon or doing jiu-jitsu. So when you look at a person, you have information that you're going to gather from how they move as well as what they tell you. And then from there, you have a series of options. Now, whether you're a chiropractor, a physiotherapist, an osteopath, or a personal trainer, you now have information to work with to start influencing that person's body based on their software, based on the habits they've acquired, based on the hardware adaptations that have occurred in their body. And what you try to do is basically rewrite the program. So hence, you can crack someone, adjust them, and give them pain relief that may well be very temporary. That input tells their brain that it's all right to go there or to move a little further or to relax a little bit here. They start doing that for a bit, but they're hardwired through habit to repeat their old patterns. So what happens is they just eventually relapse and they have to come and keep seeing you again, which is not really fixing someone. But nonetheless, whether you choose to take that route or not, you are still you're making temporary inputs of information to the brain, which you can either choose to find ways that can be reinforced in the long run so they don't become dependent on constant treatment, or keep going, make more money, which is unfortunately what a lot of therapists are out there doing, not necessarily by intention, but it happens.
Yeah. You spoke about, like, in that, we spoke about it a bit off air as well, about, the temporariness in a way of any sort of adjustment, whether it's chiropractic adjustments, manual therapy, in the sense of it gives more range to a joint temporarily because it frees it up. But if you're not strong in those certain ranges, you're going to go back to certain, old patterns. Your nervous system's got to be like, oh, okay, I'm comfortable here. I'm all right being here. I'll stay here. Like, when it comes to essentially what we're looking at is habit change.
Yeah.
And a lot of the habits that beget people you mentioned in that was that a lot of these are almost subconscious habits. It's slouching, it's the way we're doing, it's seated. Like, how do you start to find ways of unprogramming those habits so this becomes something that sticks? Because I always look at this, breathing mechanics is something that's become very, very popular recently. And I think for very, very good reason. I totally get the understanding of the impact the diaphragm has on the position of the pelvis, shoulder, rib cage, etc., etc., etc. But the one thing that's always, I've never been able to compute with breathing, and this just is an analogy to sum up, any sort of habit change regards to this stuff, is that you can do all the breath work you like. That's going to be less than 1% of the amount of breaths you take in a day. So it's like you're doing thousands of bad reps and 30 to 40 good reps a day. And it's like, in my eyes, like pissing in the ocean trying to make it yellow. So like, when it comes to actually making changes, what sort of things do you think actually reinforces what you do to actually make long-lasting change in people's movement, posture, function, things like that?
That's a very, very good question. I tell you what, while you were talking, there's about 10 things that came to mind to bring about. I'll try to put them on side and not forget them and stick to the point. Okay, breathing's a great example because we all have to breathe, right? So there's no point in the day where you're not going to only breathe when you're conscious of it. But so posture, that word, you're in some form of a posture, unless you're lying down, whether you're standing or seated, you're in a posture of one form or another all day long. So how do I give you a concise answer to this without going off on one? Okay, let's say for example,
a long form podcast, man. It's not an Instagram or TikTok video. You go off on as much of a tangent as you are welcome to do.
Okay, all right. Let's say I don't use breathing as a primary focus on everybody. Let's say, so whatever the focus, let's say breathing could be the focus. But the bottom line is you're going to have a patient. Let's say in my experience as a chiropractor, someone's going to come to me, and I'm going to look for what I'm going to see is the primary deficit. There could be multiple. The person, if we take posture as an example, the person slouches at a computer, they slouch when they're on their phone. It's not even just about slouching. Let's say it's very common here because people drive automatic cars in the UAE. So, and the seat, the wheel is on the left-hand side, right? So 99% of guys specifically, from what I've observed speaking to people, put their left hand on the wheel and lean into the right side, into the center part of the car. And there's only the right foot on the pedal. So if you can visualize that, left hand on the wheel, right foot on the pedal, that's kind of like a diagonal shift. So the upper body's leaning to the right. And then the right hip flexor is more or less engaged the whole time off the brake and the accelerator. Some people bend their left leg, cross their left leg, stick their left leg up on the side door. You wouldn't believe all sorts of things that go on there. You get this asymmetrical posture. You got to add that on top of, so there's X number of hours of that over how many years of doing that on top of, okay, do you hold your phone with your left and right hand? Do you hold it with two hands? So my generation of people, remember the old Nokia 3210s, you did the single hand typing because you wanted to get the letter C, you'd have to tap the first button 3 times, right? So you had that.
Yeah.
I can tell you, you'll see these observations across generations of what type of chronic imbalances occur from the day-to-day stuff that we're all doing, like using a phone. So, my generation, there's one thumb typing. Anyone who got a phone like 5, 6, 7 years later as their first phone. So let's say someone who's about 5, 6, 7 years younger than me, it's all double hand typing because their first phone was probably a smartphone with a full keypad. So there's a lot of that. So for me, it's like leaning into one side. For a 27-year-old, it might be the shoulders up in the air, leaning forward, 2 hands, thumb typing. If it's my mum or my grandmother, they hold the phone up here like that, and they index finger type it. They're more likely to hold the phone in front of them and do that. So trying to go back to your question, like, how do you reverse, like minus the 24 hours, minus the hours they're sleeping, those chronic imbalances by trying to teach someone how to breathe for 5 minutes or trying to teach someone how to stretch for 5 minutes. You look for the thing that creates the biggest difference. So if to start with, the person complains of a left shoulder problem and a right lower back problem, and you can kind of see that it probably got more to do with, do you drive a lot? Yes, no. That person says, yeah, in Dubai, there's one route from Sharjah to Abu Dhabi where you drive through Dubai. So there's God knows how many people doing that 1.5 hours of traffic driving each direction, so 3 hours plus in the car in traffic, that might be the first habit you want to look to break. You don't want to have to maybe change every single thing they do. You try to find something that makes a difference. So can I just get you to bring your hand off the top of the wheel and just hold the bottom of the wheel? That might just be enough to create you don't have to get the body perfect. You don't have to perfect 24 hours of the day to feel good and to move well. Your body's quite durable. Your body can tolerate a lot of crap. It's like, okay, you're in the fitness industry more specifically. Let's say you want to get your client to reduce the sugar intake, but you know that like one can of soda is not going to give someone diabetes. It's a continuous bombardment of the endocrine system over years and years of abuse that the body goes, all right, I'm done. Have diabetes. And even when you're pre-diabetic, it can be reversed within about 6 weeks. I believe. I think there's some research on this that the 6 weeks of changing your diet and working out can reverse that. You know, you can reverse type 2 diabetes provided it's not chronic. Yeah. And even if it's chronic, you can absolutely improve the state that they're in and still improve the insulin sensitivity by changing some habits. Now that person just needs to alter their food and go to the gym 2-3 times a week. They don't have to be on a treadmill running 18 hours a day or lifting weights 18 hours a day. And, you know, there is room for if you got that far, your changes in the beginning need to be a lot more drastic to get the body out of that state that it's in. And maintenance of that doesn't require a lot of effort. Actually reminds me of something I read from Charles Poliquin years back. It was about stretching. So I mean, anyone can pipe up at some point, and if I've misquoted this, this is just the point that I drew from it. I believe he was saying that stretching is effective, because this debate went back and forth where stretching is effective, and I can go into that later as well, because there's a yes and no answer to that, like with everything. But let's say he was saying stretching can be effective, and it is effective, but it needs to be done for 1 hour a day, every single day for 12 weeks. And then by completing that, you only need to stretch for, I think you only have to do it once a week after that to maintain it. I think something like that. I don't know if you remember that.
I remember talking about something like that.
So the way I used that and experimented with it in my therapy was like, okay, if I'm going to look at the possibility of a stretch being incorporated into this person's therapy, which stretch is going to be the most effective stretch that's going to get you? Because if someone comes in and says, I do 10, 20 different stretches, I'm stretching an hour every day, it's just not working, and I've just ended up doing even more and more. So I go to the gym and my mobility, instead of 10 minutes, it's now like an hour of mobility, and I feel good. But if I don't do it for 2 days, I'm back to square one. So I'm like, all right, it's not working, right? That's the first thing. If it could work, is it that one stretch is counterbalancing another stretch? You're stretching you're stretching forwards, for example, like trying to perform a toe touch, and then you're trying to do hip extension. So you can't tell me both muscles are short at the same time. Okay. So you're trying to, the way I see it is you want to stretch a muscle to improve the whole system. And you don't want to, it's like loading up a seesaw. You don't load, if the seesaw's imbalanced, there's your perception of what you think is tight and what is actually tight, like in terms of what's short tight and what's long tight. So what are you going to do to change this system? So if I can narrow it down and go, all right, I want you to do a couch stretch. That's the most common stretch I'm going to give someone for a low back problem. Okay. Now taking Poliquin's thing, he said an hour every day, but I assumed he was talking about like whole body stretching. So I kind of looked at it like, well, I don't know, if there was like 12 stretches or 10, let's say it was 10 stretches, right? That's 6 minutes per body part. So if I found the right body part, you only need about 6 minutes of stretching. Okay. So then I was like, okay, 3 times 1 minute per leg on a couch stretch every single day for 12 weeks. And if this is correct, then after 12 weeks, you'll only need to do it once a week to maintain it. So you just need some course of action that specifically and efficiently counteracts the negative effect of all the other actions to give you the best odds of getting a rebalance. That's your step one. So it's like the performance paradigm that I learned years back was you have flexibility, stability, strength, then power. So if I have let's say, a dancer, most of the dancers are plagued with hypermobility issues. Anyone who's done dance since they're a kid, their body's normally wrecked. Gymnasts as well, they're the worst. Of anyone with the injury list, as long as you can get through the gymnasts and the dancers, the ex-dancers are the worst.
All mobility, no stability, right?
Exactly. So that person's hyper flexible. There isn't really a flexibility issue that in most areas you'll find. The next thing is the stability. If you test that out, they're normally lacking in at least one significant or several areas. Strength they may or may not have, or they are strong but not in the right areas, or not in a sufficiently balanced way. So I look at that person, right, I'm going to skip flexibility. I'm going to go straight to stability. And if I find that's absolutely way off, if I find the single most efficient way to re-engage stability appropriately towards their problem, be it to increase range of motion or to increase strength or just to reduce pain, are they still going to have a bunch of bad habits throughout the whole of their day? Yes. But if I do pinpoint it down on the most precise thing possible, it will help. And it will probably do a lot more than doing 10 things that are not hitting the spot. So if I bring this all the way back around now to the breathing question, so like the breathing patterns that you talked about. Okay, let's say someone's breathing pattern is a big part of their lower back pain or their shoulder pain or their whatever. You decided in your assessment that breathing's an issue. So you give them breathing exercise. So one, if the breathing exercise is efficient, like which breathing exercises are you giving them? Like, is it really good? This one you get, are there 10 other ways to do it? Is there a better way to do it? Like if it actually, is it actually the primary source of the problem? I mean, it could be part of the problem and a great supplement to add 5 minutes of like crocodile breathing is one I use a lot. You lie face down, prone, and you just learn to breathe into your belly, and you'll feel the back of your pelvis just sort of moving up and down with each breath. Obviously, with the shoulders not moving, right? I taught myself that years ago, just first time I learned it, and I found that it stuck. I honestly, ever since, man, it didn't even take me a month, maybe a couple of weeks of just doing it here and there, and just generating a little bit of conscious awareness of it when I was maybe sitting down or doing whatever. And then integrating that into my training. So holding a bar on my back, doing a squat and just taking the air in through my diaphragm. And then under loaded efforts, this is where it really comes into it. The gym is the thing that you can use to fix everything, because this is where you exert a higher intensity of stress on the body. So, you know, if weak glutes, that's the classic one, big phrase, right? Let's say your glutes are weak, all right? And that's the cause of your back pain and your instability and your inability to do whatever. So you give someone a glute activation. Now, what does that mean? Is that, all right, let's just say your glutes are inefficient. Neurologically speaking, your brain has a very inefficient functioning pattern connection with your glutes. So they're there, they work. They might work better from some positions and not others. You may be limited at the end range of hip extension. You may not recruit them very well for whatever reason, whatever position. Okay. So now we're going to say, like, how do I know that small intervention I'm going to give is going to have an actual lasting change overall? Well, what's stopping the glutes to work in the first place? Or what's inhibiting the glutes most? What could it be? Now, from a chiropractic perspective, it could be something in that, you know, I find a restriction in the pelvis, that they're completely lopsided or they're blocked somewhere through their neck or ankle that's causing some inhibitory feedback mechanism through whatever you want to call it, right? So I might adjust that person and on functional muscle testing, find that glute suddenly starts firing really well. Okay, that might be enough. You get them to do a squat before the session. You see terrible movement, poor lack of hips in terms of the range and quality of the movement. Then you do a set of adjustments and you see them squat to full depth and they say, oh, the pain's gone and they feel amazing. Great. You go to the gym now and load it. You load it appropriately. Load it to the level that you can maintain that same quality of movement. So if you've never trained into that range before and you just gained 6 inches of depth on your squat, you might not be as strong down there at the moment. So you need to back off the weights a little bit and train until technical failure starts to occur. Until you can reinforce that squat alone is going to become your long-term reinforcement of the treatment. If the adjustments didn't do the job, or you did the adjustments, but you still got, let's say, tight hip flexor. All right, let's say you've chronically shortened your hip flexors from sitting. Your hip flexors are probably going to be weak as well, but they have the inability to function through range and the inability to lengthen through range. So they're going to be possibly your primary inhibitor to your glute. So flexibility first, let's give you a couch stretch. You only need to do 3 minutes per side a day. Stability, let's just assume that this patient's not the problem for now. Strength, well, key muscle, the biggest muscle, the strongest muscle, the most inefficient muscle, in that case might be the glute. So cool. I give you a couch stretch. So reciprocal inhibition states the contraction of the agonist leads to inhibition of the antagonist. Well, if the concentric contraction of a hip flexor causes, or let's say hip flexor muscles, whatever those muscles are, there's a few of them, can cause an inhibition, a reciprocal inhibition of hip extension or extensor muscles, in this case, primarily the glute. Doing a couch stretch should upregulate the function of your glute. And then doing an exercise that loads the glute through the range that you're not used to using, so your brain can memorize and learn that it's both safe and strong, is going to stop you from actually needing to do the couch stretch. As after 12 weeks, you won't need to stretch anymore. So if you're already a gym goer with back pain, I'm going to give you this as an example. You start off with an alignment, a few adjustments, just to get things moving and working. You give someone an exercise that will prevent the primary area of inhibition becoming of manifesting constantly. Get them to do it at a minimum effective dose, which might be 3 minutes per side, but just daily, and start to incorporate the loading of the functional deficit they never had before, which might be a deep squat. It doesn't have to be. It could be a deadlift. It could be a split lunge. It could be a Bulgarian split squat, whatever. It's just something that loads the hip adequately to train and to facilitate that muscle in the new range that has been acquired. That will flip-flop over until the strength and the range that you're constantly or consistently loading once, twice, 3 times a week provides enough of a neural stimulus to the brain to memorize it. And that builds durability. Now you don't need the stretch anymore because the strength in that side inhibits the original area of tightness. So you're no longer tight. And then what happens is this, to conclude, because I know I'm dragging this one out, but to conclude, that the more durable your body is, the more you'll tolerate crap. So, the person who drinks soda, who never goes to the gym and doesn't do any physical activity, and the person who's drinking soda that works out heavy weights 5 days a week, does maybe a bit of cardio or whatever, and otherwise is generally eating well, is probably not going to get diabetes. I put money on it that if I had to pick between the two people, I'm not worried about the highly trained athlete drinking a can of Coke or Pepsi once in a while.
Yeah.
So it's
interesting talking about durability. And what I've noticed, you must have as much of a soda addiction as I do with my Coke Zero behind here.
I've got electrolytes here because it's Ramadan, and I just had my first meal like an hour ago, so my mouth is getting a little dry.
Yeah, drink away, mate. You've earned it. But it's interesting you talk about durability, right? Like it's a weird world when people think about mobility, and I love the tangent went on because one of my questions was a lot of people don't really understand what the issues with mobility are. They go, I'm sore, I'll stretch it, but they don't know why they're stretching it. They don't know what tightness is. And you wouldn't get, using your analogy, of someone going, they've been drinking soda for years and they have one soda and then they go to the doctors and they get diabetes. They never go, it was that last soda did it. But you get people all the time that go, I just picked up the newspaper and I had back pain. I'm like, how heavy was that newspaper?
I sneezed.
Sneeze. Yeah, exactly. That sneeze that did it. You know.
But, I mean, the straw that broke the camel's back, and you blame the straw. It's like if you tied your shoelaces one day and your back went, you wouldn't blame your shoelaces, or would you? You mean you were not adequately conditioned to perform that movement under that load, even if that load was very small. That pain only shows up when you run out of ways to compensate. You don't just get pain because you did one thing wrong. But people like, I was just training legs like normal and I must have just picked the weight up wrong. I'm like, you can act, if your body's durable and functional, stable, adequately as a whole, you can pick things up incorrectly, whatever. I mean, let's take the word incorrectly as well.
Yeah.
In the non-textbook fashion of keeping your spine in neutral and hinging your hips and whatever. You could pick it, I can round your back and pick something, because you put your shoes and socks on in the morning every day, you round your back, you don't hip hinge. You have adequate durability to tolerate that movement and those positions. When you haven't got the ability to tolerate those, but you've run out of options, you've neglected something, whether you like it or not, for long enough that you no longer have the ability to, your body's just said, like, my facet joints have just been unguarded and unprotected and overstretched again and again and again and again. At some point, they're going to go. And then you go, how do I fix this? I'm like, you're going to have to change some habits. And coming back to what you said earlier, it's like, will 5 minutes of corrective breathing be enough? Well, it depends. What's the main factor And it helps if you have a chiropractor or a good physio or osteo, somebody that can shortcut the process. Because I mean, like, probably most people could work on their breathing patterns. Probably most people could do, there's probably one or two stretches out there that will have a generally good carryover. There's probably some exercises that a lot of people don't do enough of in the gym or avoid, or just don't take the time to learn correctly.
Yeah.
To gain the benefit that they could be gaining out of it. So, unless you're, if you're a professional athlete, this is another level, because it's like racing a car. I mean, if every time you drive your car, like, it's a 50-50 chance you're going to hit a lamppost, you probably haven't learned to drive properly. And maybe you're convinced that you know how to use the car properly, but your car hasn't had a service in 10, 15, 20 years. So maybe you service the car and then you touch up on your driving skills, and then you probably sort the problem out for the most part. You still have to service the car once a year. And you still have to drive responsibly. It doesn't mean you can start driving with your feet. You still got to stick within your limitations. And if you want to become a racing driver, you have to up your skills and up the management of your vehicle. But if you do compete, you do want to do Formula One, best drivers in the world, perhaps. But when anyone makes a mistake, you pay. As I found out in my sport.
Before we come back onto mobility, because there's loads of things I want to touch on what you said about the mobility stuff, but you land me up nicely to something I sort of want to discuss. Is that when I was doing my research for this, I stumbled across a YouTube video of near-death experience when it comes to a squat. Like, on that topic of knowing that, like, what is your thoughts going into something that is a really heavy lift, like daunting lift, but also what in those moments where something's going wrong, like what's going through your head, and what's your preparation for around that, just to prevent that happening?
Well, your preparation to prevent that, well, you don't go into, let's just keep the example specific then, because it's easier to answer me, and let's talk powerlifting. I never prepared to prevent an injury specifically, or a disaster moment. We're talking about, I think the video I don't really upload on YouTube anymore. So I think the video might have been an old 420.5 kilo.
It was exactly that one. Yeah.
So basically that was like almost a suicide mission. Looking back, it was nonsensical. If I was a coach, I would never have, I'll give you the backlog of that. I tried a different training cycle of preparation. I mostly trained Westside Conjugate for the last 15 years. Everything that I knew that would tell me that I was prepared was based on that system. And I just decided to try something a bit differently, train more traditionally with straight weight. And the heaviest, I think I attempted a double with 375 in the gym. And honestly, it was more like 1 rep and a quarter. I couldn't keep my air on the second rep for long enough to do 2. So I've gone into the comp, attempting, I believe it was 360, 390, 410, which was my goal, 410 to cross the 900 pound mark. And I unracked my open, and it felt incredibly heavy. Now, it probably felt heavy because I hadn't trained with I hadn't felt anything over 375 in training. And it's different to how I would have prepared in the past with bands. We would have overloaded with bands, and I would have, with the intention to squat 410, I would have wanted to at least feel about 430 in combined band tension and weight. So that's how I knew how to accommodate. But also just how you feel, and how you feel has nothing to do with it. And it comes to sport, like, the way I look at it is this way: it doesn't matter how you feel. I hate that question before a comp. Someone asks me how you're feeling. I hate it. Because before a comp, I have to be someone else. I can't be me. Because it's not the day-to-day normal version of you that cares about people's health. And like, you just that there's no sense in unracking a weight that can kill you, and putting yourself in that position for what? Like, we're all driven by different things, right? You have to have something slightly wrong with you to want to do what powerlifter does. Like, it's a given, but it's a different, like, let's say some people's vice is alcohol and smoking, and some people have a vice of playing golf and tiddlywinks or whatever. It doesn't do it for me. For whatever it was, whatever got me into it, that's my vice. That's what I love doing. I love overcoming that challenge. I love bettering myself in that. And maybe because a bunch of people told me years ago I'd never be very good at it, or that I couldn't do it, that I probably wanted to do it more. So how do I explain this? There was never a preparation for how to prevent something going wrong, other than you just prepared to be the best you can be and be adequately strong. You don't think about what can go wrong, because there's a lot of things that, Michael Schumacher, God bless him. The guy, I don't know how he's doing these days, but he had that skiing accident, right?
Yeah.
I mean, who would have thought, like, after a career of Formula One, that's the way he'd get messed up? But I doubt that guy, if he's still considered the greatest Formula One driver ever, but did he prepare himself? Probably his team prepared a lot of safety measures. But in the end, he's got to probably focus on driving the car as fast as possible. I mean, maybe I'm just oversimplifying. Maybe it's not the best example,
Yeah.
but I've just got to focus on lifting the weight. Not if I focus on not getting hurt. Let's say, like, you've had an injury. I had an entire quadriceps rupture nearly 2 years ago, and that's been quite a hell of a journey trying to get back into it and putting myself in through the steps. But the biggest thing you notice is every time your brain comes to tell you, hey, what if something goes wrong? You're just getting back to squatting 60 kilos and you feel happy about it. And the next week you're like, I'm going to do 65. Everything's good up to 60. And then the moment you put 65 on the bar, your brain's going, what's going to happen? And you have to override that. So you're constantly learning to override that fear.
It can become a self-fulfilling prophecy as well, right? As soon as you start to worry about hurting yourself, you almost ingrain bad habits of, well, I'm going to try and shift away from this, which in turn might make this more likely than ever before.
What's going to help you to complete the lift? It's not going to be focusing on things that go wrong. It's going to be focusing on everything that you need to do technically. So there might be about 10 or 15 cues that I do very quickly just to unrack a bar. I mean, just the hand placing, the walking up to the bar till my chest touches it, getting the feet underneath. Because if you unrack that bar and your feet slightly forwards, it's like an inch forward or an inch back, you're off center. It's going to throw you off. Then getting your head under the bar and making sure you're in center. The next thing is going to be like your head position. So you've already clenched hard on the bar. You get your stance. You got to get your feet right. The angle of your toes. You step by step when you're under the bar. Now there's a checklist of how you're going to lock your spine in, set your hips and your knees at the right angle, so that when you unrack it, you come out just right. And you want your head up, but you don't want it up, but you want to pull your chin back to engage your deep neck flexors. You want to push your tongue up to the roof of your mouth. You want to take the air into the diaphragm. You want to and then engage your grip, squeeze your lats, brace through the midsection, push your knees a certain way, dig your feet down, tick, 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 to unrack a bar. I haven't got time to think about what can go wrong. If I have an ounce of thought about something going wrong, it's going to mess up the sequence of events that I need to get a good start. Because in powerlifting, you can tell, I feel I can tell most of the time. I can get a pretty good prediction most of the time of how a lift is going to go just by watching the person unrack it. I can tell you I read their face. I'm more interested about what's going on in here.
Yeah.
That's why I love to talk to people who are highly successful, because let's say we're all messed up in this sport. And that messed up thing is the thing that gets you to do the unimaginable, but it's also probably the self-destructive thing that leads to things going wrong as well eventually. And one or two people, as Michael Jordans or whoever, or the Floyd Mayweathers, that somehow have just the right formula up here to get there and to rise a little bit above and not get messed up and just to keep winning. There's something unique, and it's nothing to do with the physical. Because that day, giving you the example going back, that I hadn't unracked anything more than 375. So the moment I've done my opener, I'm like, God, that's heavy. My brain's already not thinking I'm going to do well. 390, I don't know what I remember thinking, but I remember I lost my tension in my body and I kind of rounded my back and just tweaked it. And it felt like someone just stabbed a knife in my lower back. And I was like, oh crap. And then by my third lift, I was like, well, I came in for this 410 and I can't even bend over to put my knee wraps on because it feels like there's a knife lodged in my spine. Now, there's not, looking at it now, it would be a good time to stop if you had health as your priority. But sport's not about health. Sport's about winning. You don't run onto a football field saying, I'm going to be really healthy today. You go, I want to win.
Yeah.
I want to reach whatever the goal is. So I'm actually cared less about winning and more about just my own personal goal. So yeah, my back might be broken. It doesn't matter. I would just have to brace harder and get the cues even more perfect.
Yeah.
So I don't ask me how I wrap my knees. And then I got the lift. Once I got the lift, it's like, I can do anything. I don't halt the competition. Wait, I'm calling for a fourth lift. It's not going to count towards my score. But if I break the British record, it counts as it's an official record. So a fourth lift is reserved for a record. It's a waste of energy if you're trying to win the event, because those extra kilos aren't going to add to your score. So that scenario was like what goes through your head when things are going wrong. But in that split second of falling forwards, I unracked it. It felt so heavy. I don't remember. I remember unracking it, but I didn't know I'd unracked it. I thought I was still straining to get the bar to leave the rack, and then I saw the hooks on the monolift swing away from me in my peripheral vision, and I was like, "Don't move." Your brain. The scariest moment I've ever felt in my entire life was that moment. I put a post on it on my Instagram. I've never felt more alone in my whole life than in that moment. I cannot explain. I tried to explain why powerlifting is meaningful, why I love doing it, but it's like in those precise moments, especially in the middle of a lift, you don't exist at all. You'll never feel more like you don't exist. And at the same time, you'll never be more present. There's nothing, there's no, I've never heard of someone describe a recreational drug that can do that. So there is a moment of like, you have a brain that you've trained to ignore the other brain. The normal brain, the survival brain tells you don't move, because the pressure you're under is, if I bend my knee a centimeter, I'm going to collapse and I'm going to die. And the other brain's got to go, fuck it, and just go. So I remember bending the knees, wobbling, panicking for a second, thinking I'm going to die again, and then overriding and just going down. Totally got the line wrong, the depth. But if anyone want to watch that video, yeah, I'm not saying that was depth. It was miles off it. I would never have got the lift if I hadn't fallen over either. I just was wobbling. I just was determined to give this everything. By the time I started to come up, I felt that I was falling forwards. I knew I was. I knew. Yeah. I've never been there. I've never been falling forwards with 420 kilos on my back. So I'm not prepared for that. I have no idea. All I know is I'm just trying to get more vertical than horizontal in the quickest time I can to get to the top. And once you realize you've missed the hooks and you're going forwards, it's like, that's it, I'm going to die. So it was like, I thought I was going to die when I unracked it. I thought I was going to die when I felt my knees wobble. I thought I was going to die as I was coming up, falling forwards. And as I started falling to the floor, I thought, I'm going to die because this is going to crush me. In a split second, I was like, when you hit the floor, stay on the floor. There's space under the bar. Like, you won't die. Yeah. And then as I was going to the floor, as I think either hit the floor or just before, honestly, it's very, very hard to get a time frame on this, but there was a moment where I thought, the rack is going to tip onto me. And where I was estimating it's probably going to smash me in the head or the neck. I was like, I'm going to die. So I know it was like 4 or 5 times. And then after a couple of seconds, the rack didn't hit me. So on the video, the safeties that were holding the bar pulled the rack forwards and either wasn't going to go, or a couple of guys at the back got their hand on it and it just didn't tip onto me. You can't prepare for it. You just prepare for, you have to be willing to die. It's the only way.
I totally get that analogy, and I've never got anywhere near close to 420 kilos on my back, but that feeling of like feeling so powerful yet so powerless. Like, you're in control of the weight, but if this goes wrong, that weight is very much in control of you. I can totally get that sort of sensation in what is a split seconds, as the lift goes through.
You only have so much control through any of that lift, really. It's like you're walking on a tightrope. Let's say you're going to cross the Grand Canyon or somewhere far enough that, but let's say you're halfway down and it's not like I can just quickly jump back. Like, you're committed. It's too late. The moment the hooks swing away, you can call to rack it, but honestly, the other part of you've got a few hundred people watching you. You called it. Everyone's made a fuss, especially if it's a British record or something. And that's your moment that you dreamed of. And then your panic mode says, I'm out. No, but you don't feel control. You know what you need to do to ride the storm. Like, there are just a couple of cues in your mind. Like, that tension you have to generate to stay stable. It's, this is where you'll hemorrhage the eyes. You'll see guys having nosebleeds. It's an incredible amount of pressure, but you're also getting, your training conditions you to over time familiarize. But it's always that 1 kilo extra. It doesn't matter how strong you are. Whenever you enter the realm of 1 kilo extra, everything wants to break down. So again, what are you going to focus on? Like, you don't feel your body at all. you can't see anything because your vision tunnels, literally tunnels. So everything goes black. Your hearing just fades out. The only thing you'll ever hear is your training partner, whoever, screaming 3, 2, 1 up when they're calling you death. And I don't even know how you can hear that over the crowd, the music, and everything else. But you numb out. It's an out of body experience. It's not something I can explain very easily, but anyone who's done it knows that. But again, you put yourself in a scenario again and again in training. It's like with any sport, you prepare yourself for those moments. It's like, and I never understood this, but maybe this is a similar comparison. Motorcyclists, guys that love racing, they tell you that, when they fall off at high speed, that because they're experienced, they know how to fall. I'm like, how do you know how to fall? You've heard the expression? It's like,
I have.
Just know how to come. Like, you don't practice coming off a bike at high speed, but you've just been the intensity of the situation. A lot of it is already familiarized. So whatever is extra for you to deal with is probably all you have to focus on dealing with.
Yeah.
You're not going to maybe panic as much. I don't know.
I suppose it's a weird. It's practicing through failure, like in the sense of like, I suppose you don't ever practice falling at high speeds, but eventually you sort of learn how to take them, right? And just by sheer, I don't want to splat across the side of the track. I don't know, but I think the only thing I suppose that I can imagine is close to it is nowhere near the same level as falling under a 420 or coming off a motorcycle at high speeds. But I always remember like when playing rugby, and in that sense of when you get hit, you sort of automatically learn how to take a hit and learn how to fall. Yes, you can practice that to a degree, but it's eventually it becomes so second nature where you just do it, you just get hit.
You're familiar with the environment.
Yeah.
It's like if you've been in a boxing ring and you've never been, I don't know if you've ever done any boxing or MMA.
No.
But if you go, so if you go train for a year, but just hit pads. Okay. And everyone after 1 year of hitting pads looks like Floyd Mayweather. Like everybody looks good on pads. I haven't fought since like 2008. I used to do some MMA and whatnot. It's been a while. And I can tell you, like, the pad work, you look at boxers and you think, you look at people that are not considered to have good hands in an MMA fight, but when you watch them on the pads, they all look good. It's something completely different when there's another moving opponent trying to hit you back. There's another thing when you get hit in the face and you're not familiar with that. There's a flinch reflex. The punch comes to you all. The moment you get hit, it's like you want to close your eyes, you want to put your head down, you want to shell up. Like, even you might not be getting hit that hard, and the initial phases of training, you've got to eliminate that flinch reflex. So it doesn't mean you still can't and won't ever get knocked out. It just means that you're going to become that much more familiar. So there's going to be a lot less occasions where you won't see the punch coming, because the one that, in combat sports, they always say the one that hurts is the one you didn't see coming. It's like you didn't anticipate it, or one shot was thrown behind another shot and you just didn't, or you moved into it, right? So more likely you're conditioned to your environment. So you're conditioned to the environment of a weight on your back. You're conditioned to the environment of high-speed bike and the sudden changes in the road surface or whatever could occur in your environment. You're hypersensitized to those the variables, if you will.
With the people you work with, because like you obviously work with a number of athletes as well, from Olympians in various athletes in various sports to strength coaches, powerlifters, bodybuilders, and things like this. Do you see there's a massive discrepancy by the different issues that you see of people coming onto your table? Because there's, everyone always talks about athletes being the best compensators rather than actually necessarily being better movers. And you, as you said, you become conditioned to your environment as opposed to necessarily performing and functioning well. So, like, do you feel like you get is there very similar common traits with everyone that sorts to come in to see you, or is a gymnast and a lawyer, father of three, going to be completely different when you walk in the table, or is there a lot of common trends?
Well, okay, let's go through the similarities and the differences. There are similarities across all people because we're all humans. As much as we love to think we're unique, we're all different. People say, "Oh, I know my body." It's like, yeah, sure. Like you got 2 arms, 2 legs, you have the same anatomy. You have different limb lengths and different proportions, but there is a fact. When you learn anatomy in university, they don't give you 6 billion different anatomies. They give you one, and then you just know that there's some variations between people. So, I mean, yeah, an athlete might still be someone who, and maybe let's not say professional, let's just say someone that competes on a high enough level to be considered an athlete, but still has a desk job. They still have certain habits. There are sports like cycling where you're still going to hunch forwards on a bike and still have some kind of a chronic postural issue. Like you're going to see certain things that are still quite similar, because driving a car, sitting at a desk, compared to a couple of 100 years ago, we still all sit too much. So whatever sitting does that's negative, there are still traces of that, at least in high level athletes. But what you're going to see in an athlete is, and in the word athlete, again, athlete of what sport, because if it is a gymnast, the flexibility issues are generally going to be the last thing you're going to worry about most of the time. There could be a single muscle or area of movement that's still considered a flexibility problem that's being overshadowed by the gross, the extreme amount of mobility they have everywhere else, so they can hide that problem. Like your main thing is you will see. When I say, I think I wrote an article about that a while back, about athletes are the best cheaters. And I think my point in that was athletes are very efficient at compensating. So probably the biggest difference is not that the compensations don't exist, but they're just a lot more efficient at doing so, because they're just more efficient in the overall function. They are better. That's a positive thing. It can be a negative thing as far as trying to find problems that you want to improve upon, because they get away with doing things incorrectly or inefficiently for a lot longer before those problems might show themselves up. But at the same time, an athlete's going to place their body under a lot more stress than the average person. So smaller imbalances are going to present themselves. Let's say if you have a minor issue in your knee and you squat 50, 60 kilos, you might not feel it. If you squat 200 kilos, you may be more likely to feel it. So give and take here. It's like the bodies of athletes tend to be more efficient, more conditioned, and work better and more bulletproof, but they load their bodies a lot more and push them to the limit more. So you end up with the same point where eventually you're going to reach the same problems.
Yeah.
You're still looking to find the deficit, like whether it's flexibility, stability, strength, or power, or whatever.
You mentioned structure and function and like different anatomies. And I think this is always a very interesting debate, especially within the last 5-10 years, where the exercise mechanics stuff and the RTS stuff become commonplace with coaches. And I'm not slating RTS in the slightest. Michael Goulden, who's going to come on the show soon, is one of the smartest minds in the industry. But the problem is always with these things is the application. So I often saw it a lot where this you see two ends of the spectrum. People as full range of motion, regardless, no matter what, all the time. And then you get the other side of the coin where it's like, well, you got big big long femurs, short tib fibs. You shouldn't squat. And then they never prove better. And they actually get worse at the lift because they're not practiced in it. So where's your views on like how much stuff that's mobility issue is structural related? Like they can't get in there because it's a skeleton and you don't have an x-ray, so we can't really change much about it. And what is actually possible with most people?
Okay. Well, let's use the squat as an example. That there's no way we can say that every human on the planet is structurally built to squat exactly the same way to gain the same effect. So if we're talking about building muscle, you don't have to be efficient. In fact, it's actually in some cases beneficial to be highly inefficient, right? If you know what I mean. Like you're not trying to find the easiest way to move the weight. It reminds me of I don't know where the quote was from, but it was like the skill of the powerlifter is to how do you put it, to make a heavy weight feel light, and the skill of a bodybuilder is to make a lightweight feel heavy. They're both admirable skills, and I think we should try to master both of them. It means how can I, when my intention is to move a weight and as much as possible or produce as much power or force as possible, how can I do that efficiently? How can I use my whole body? How can I be efficient in that? And the other side is when I know that I have a deficit or a weak point or just a muscle that I wish to make bigger and target, a weak point perhaps that doesn't integrate itself into the full movement as much as how can I isolate that muscle? How can I place emphasis and load? Both scenarios are about knowing your body very well and becoming familiarized with your abilities and looking for things to improve in your own ability. So If your goal is just to build muscle, fine, that's your goal. It's up to you. You might not ever need to do a squat to do so. On the other end of it, it might be considered that you have or will acquire a degree of dysfunction by ignoring a whole body movement such as a squat. I mean, I'm just using that as an example, and I still don't think it's essential. But if you could do Bulgarian split squats through a good range, and maybe sumo style wide squat, you've adapted to that front back plane and that lateral plane, opening up your hips and moving your glutes, using your glutes and your hips in as much range as you can safely. You may never need to do a squat, and then you can load up as many machines as you want. But if you ignore basic human function for long enough and work around it, eventually you're not going to, like you said, if you just don't squat at all, maybe you're not perfectly or well built to squat, but you certainly won't get better at it by not doing it and ignoring it completely. So if 10 years down the line you end up with a serious back problem, and you could have maybe prevented it by trying to keep some integrated function in your training. Jordan Shallow's this is the thing where I like Jordan Shallow. So the first time I remember hearing him talk, he said something that was probably a better worded version of something I've been trying to say for a while that I 100% agree with. And he was talking in the context of powerlifting. He said, and again, I don't quote me word for word, so anyone wants to correct me on exactly how he said it, including the man himself. But it was like you're gonna bend it until it breaks. So what your best bet is to find the minimum integrated function that's required to keep it going for as long as possible. So it's like a sport like powerlifting is, however good and however strong you get, you're going to keep loading weights. If you find a weak point, it's just going to end up lifting even more. And then you're going to find another weak point. It might be the same weak point for the next 10, 20 years that you always have to improve. It might change because you become stronger and other things start to lag. But in the end, like certain movements like squat, bench, and deadlift aren't going to give you full capacity of human function. It's definitely not going to help with your overhead strength, overhead movements, or gymnastics, or playing a game of football. So you might be happy to compromise the ability to scratch your own back and go your whole life never being able to do it, as long as you never have to you're never presented with a scenario where you're forced to do that movement. You might get away with not really having too many issues. You just won't be very functional. Functional in one sport might not be functional in another sport. But at the same time, would it help your performance to have some diversity in your functional ability? Yeah, some single leg work would help. Some stability work would help. You're probably going to help you to be stronger too, and just be a bit more bulletproof and durable. So I like to use squats, or actually, as you know, I'm a big fan of box squatting. Mm-hmm. And the reason I like the box squat is because it integrates the squat mechanics and gets you to use as much posterior chain as possible, being that in most cases, that's the primary weakness, the primary area that would benefit either sports function or general day-to-day function, or even just back pain. And it's an efficient movement. It means that if you have no interest in squatting, you just want to do bodybuilding or play football or whatever, but I want you to give me just a little bit of effort, like for a few minutes every week, to prevent other injuries and allow you to keep doing what you like doing. That would be the minimum integrated function. That's finding something that's efficiently targeting a mobility issue or a strength issue or a stability issue to allow your other things to be able to keep going for longer without running into significant problems.
I think integration is a really interesting word there when it comes to that, because I think a lot of times when people have these arguments, we're looking at things in isolation, like in the sense of we're trying to find the perfect exercise for every goal based around the squat. Is it the best exercise for everyone to build muscle? Absolutely not. I would argue for, unless you're 3'4" with tiny femurs, it's a bad, exercise for building quads for most people in comparison to a hack.
I haven't built quads out of a squat in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I can squat close, wide, medium, Olympic front squat. I just feel glutes, hamstrings, and lower back.
Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. And I think when we look at that, people are trying to find, okay, it's this king of exercise mentality, whereas it really is sort of like, how do you integrate that into the bigger picture? I always look at, like, for years, I didn't squat at all for this reason. And I got more dysfunction because I never explored these end ranges where I was limited as well. I never integrated myself back into them. From a mentality and psychological perspective, your training becomes stale because there's only so much you can keep loading up a hack squat before you kind of want something that's mentally stimulating. So having an integrated squat in there is like, even if that's not what's going to build your quads or whatever what you're trying to build, having that in there is, I can see you talked about metrics earlier on, the retest ability of metrics of something. That is your ability to go, everything in my program was working because my main lift's going up. And if my squat, as you mentioned for you, is going to be more hamstring, lower back, glute dominant squat, that's not a bad thing. It just means your accessory work is going to be more split squats, hack squats, pendulum squats, leg extensions, etc., etc. Whereas that 3'4" guy with short femurs is going to be more hip thrust, incline hypers, leg curls, etc., etc. And no one talks about that accessory motions and how that makes a difference to what your squat should be.
An idea about accessories as well. Okay, prior to that, the pendulum always swings from one side to the other, right? When you learn something new. So if you walk into the fitness industry, just walk into the gym. Let's just say you go to the gym, you learn a few basics, you see some results. That's the way. Whoever taught you was the one you listened to, and that's the way everything is now for a while, until you don't get results for long enough or you get hurt. A lot of people just take time off and then go back and repeat the same thing and end up with the same problem. If you're smart enough or well-guided enough, fortunate enough to get the information, someone will show you something different. Let's say it gets rid of the problem and you get results again. You're like, oh, I was wrong. I was blind, but now I can see. And often you see the pendulum swing the other way. Now, this applies to chiropractic, physio, everything, healthcare, fitness. I've been there. And if you're honest with yourself, you'll eventually come around to a point and go, all right, once upon a time, I made such a statement. I understand why I made the statement. It was a better statement than the previous statement, but it's not the end product and there's still more to it. So you find, where does it go? Or this statement worked for like 90% of people, but I just didn't want to really see the 10% of people it didn't work for. And I was like, no, you're just not doing it right. And you know what I mean? Like you start to find out that there's something else. If it comes to squatting as an example, and then saying, what are my accessories? Well, I was always like glutes, because it's the biggest, strongest muscle and it's the primary muscle. I neglected my quads completely, so I got away with it for a very long time. 7 years, I didn't really train any quads at all. And then comes a point where for whatever reason you start going, man, I need some quads. It's like, well, maybe if I'd have just been a bit more open-minded earlier, I would have had a little bit of variety. Like you said, I would have done a bit of extra quad work. I would have just mixed it up. I would have periodized my training a little bit, or I would have found a few things, a side project, if you want to call it that. So like my squat is the primary, but I do want to see improvement in my leg size, or I do want to also see improvement in a couple of these movements that I find challenging. And then you be intelligent as you want and try to find a movement that still provides an overall benefit of either function, health, or strength that can carry over into what you're interested in, or otherwise just something to keep you in one piece for longer. But if you don't let that pendulum swing around a little bit, you get caught up on one side for long enough, you're going to pay the hard way. Yeah, so you have to start playing around. If somebody's built to squat, bench is a better example. Some people that just bench and just get stronger at benching. I mean, well, maybe any of the lifts could be an example. But I said I've got long arms. I was taught in powerlifting that the bench is like 75% triceps. Okay, I'm not using the bench as a chest exercise, so I'm not performing it technically with the intention to load the chest. I'm performing it with the intention to lift as much weight as possible, which in my case doesn't use a lot of chest. But having said that, if I do a bunch of reps on bench, my chest will still get pumped no matter what I do. And my triceps just won't feel like they've done anything. So I have to do a ton of tricep accessory work if I'm going to keep progressing on that bench. And benching more is just not going to, if I bench twice a week, every single time I've done that, I run into shoulder problems, elbow problems. It doesn't matter whether it was speed work, rep work, light and heavy, heavy and heavy, whatever it was, it didn't work for me. But there are other people bench 4 times a week, do no accessories. They build all the right muscles and they just keep getting stronger. So if your mechanics are better suited to a movement, you're probably going to get a more proportional development from just doing more of that movement. And you could probably get away with just doing that movement for a very long time. It doesn't mean there's no accessory that could benefit you, but you definitely wouldn't need as much of it.
And that's where you talk about sort of, it's learning your body and individuality. I trained with a guy called Will when I was working in London, and like he had the biggest bowel rib cage I've ever seen in my life. Like you could balance a pint on his rib cage, And so like him and me training chest together, the program has ended up very different. We started on the same program and it deviated massively because my bench was a lot of tricep, barely any chest, nowhere near the same strength ability as he has. But then a lot of our accessory work completely changed. He didn't need any more chest, whereas I needed a lot more chest because I barely touched it in my actual press itself.
Well, I didn't train chest for like 10 years. I mean, like if you look at me with a shirt off and you just never knew me and be like, well, what does this guy train the most? I mean, maybe more recently, recent few years, I'm a little bit more balanced. But if you go back maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, you look at me and be like, all right, he basically trains abs every day. He trains chest, he trains traps, and then he trains his lats. I'm like, well, I haven't trained chest really since I was about, more than 10 years. Anytime I start adding chest training in it messes everything up. I'm doing more chest has not benefited any single one of my lifts. So I don't train chest. I mean, I bench. I work up to a max single, if you want to call that chest training. I don't feel my chest doing anything. And I walk off and do another hour or two of accessories that don't involve any chest. I don't train traps. I haven't done that since I was about 18, maybe 20 was the last time I might have done anything. I really stopped. So that's like 15 years I haven't trained traps. And I haven't trained my abs since I was about 18 either. I mean, I started doing ab stuff because I realized it was a weak area.
Yes.
It might look all right, but it doesn't mean it's not. Doesn't mean it's strong. So yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a lie. I added abs like once or twice a week, basic stuff, but probably 10 years of doing nothing on them in the middle. So what I'm trying to get at is like you can't even, if you're talking about performance, you can't even just look in the mirror and say, oh, this is what I need to work on. If you're doing it from an aesthetic point of view, yeah, you say, okay, that's not big enough. That's overshadowing. I don't need to do as much if you're trying to sculpt a body. But yeah, you do have to decide what your goal is. Like, what are you trying to do in the first place? Because if you don't have an interest in function whatsoever, it would be still foolish not to consider that having a completely dysfunctional body is just far less bulletproof and far more likely to get injured, which will stunt you in the goals that you're interested in.
Nothing ruins growing muscle more than spending 6 months off with an injury where you can barely train it.
Yeah, I mean, you could be a Formula One driver. You're still going to be in the gym doing fitness work. If you get tired halfway through a race because you're just so unfit, you're smoking 20 a day and drinking, and yeah, you're not going to be able to concentrate and perform in the race. Even though having a bigger bench or a bigger squat isn't directly going to make you a better racing driver, but a degree of fitness definitely benefits. So you've got to find, back to what Jordan Shallow said, was there's that minimum integrated function that you need to be able to keep this thing going. Even if you are pushing extremes all the time and you know you're going to break it eventually, you still got to keep sight of something. And it might take some work. Maybe you have to work with a therapist or a bit of trial and error, but one way or another, you need to find out what it is that you deteriorate in first and make sure you've got something in place to keep that thing going at least.
In terms of integrated function, from one statement to the next, and what's the earmark with the title of the podcast, because it's been one of your most popular claims, and we touched on it earlier on.
Yeah,
but it's still the thing that I think is everyone doesn't understand. Coaches, clients, anything else. And that is your view on hamstrings are not tight. So explain to me, why do you think the hamstrings are never tight? Because we all feel them tight, right? They feel tight.
So there's one brief statement is tightness and the perception of tightness are two completely different things. You think something's tight because you feel tension. Okay. Now, before you can define a muscle that can be completely shortened in its contracted state. That's probably what we think. We think a muscle is tight because it feels tight, or we feel tension for whatever reason, either just resting or trying to perform a movement. You interpret that there's tension, therefore you say that must mean it's short. You assume it's short, therefore you assume you must need to stretch it or massage it. So if I take an elastic band and I stretch it, is it going to get tighter or looser in that moment? It's going to feel tighter, right? We agreed?
Yeah, we agreed.
So if I've got an elastic band that I've stretched out, it's going to feel tight. And then if I was thinking, okay, I want to get rid of that feeling of tension, what would I do to get rid of the feeling of tension? Would I keep pulling on it? Or would I try to restore it back to a neutral position? So maybe an easier way to explain would be like the shoulders and the upper body that we mentioned earlier. Your shoulders roll forwards. If you're listening to this, just roll your shoulders forward as much as you can. Like slouch and roll your shoulders forward. And then think about it. Are your chest muscles, are your pecs in that moment, are they shorter? Have they shortened or have they lengthened? They've shortened, right? The front of your body has shortened. And to accommodate that movement, the upper back muscles, have they shortened or have they lengthened? They have lengthened. Okay, let that sink in. Now, when someone sits at a desk or at a computer for long enough, they don't say, oh man, my chest is so tight from sitting. No one complains about pain, stiffness, and tension there. They always complain about the upper shoulders and their upper back, right? Maybe their neck. We got to think about your head forward position on top of that. But it's the posterior surface of the body that everybody complains about being being tight. But none of those muscles are shortened from, say, slouching. But everyone who will feel that tension will immediately pull their arm across the body, start stretching that way, pull the head down, touch the toes, going further into the position that caused the problem in the first place. So can you trust that just because it feels tight that it needs to be stretched or in some way needs to be lengthened? In a simple view of it, no. When it comes to the hamstrings, let's just take the hips and the hip area as a general area. We all sit too much. Most people can agree that much at least. The sitting position shortens the hip. So the front of the hip, let's just say sitting at 90 degrees, the posterior hip is at 270 degrees. So the front of your hip is in the short position. The posterior hip is in the long position. You tell me your lower back feels stiff. You're stretching your lower back all day long. You're sitting down slouching, rounding your back, stretching it out. So your back's being stretched all day long. And then you say your back's stiff. Everyone's like, my back's tight. It's stiff. I need to stretch it. Or I injured my back. I need to strengthen it. Like you're a personal trainer. Have you ever had a client that you've had to tell them, when you cue a client, okay, you're not squeezing this or you're not engaging that, and you try to get something to correct a movement. Have you ever had to tell a client that they're not using enough lower back?
Absolutely.
Is there any single exercise that you can think of where you could ever find a person not using enough lower back? No. Because the lower back works. Unless you're lying flat on the floor, your lower back is always working. So you can do a bicep curl, your lower back, so the muscles around your trunk are working constantly. And if we look at the efficiency of how well are they working, let's break it down. Let's say the abdominal wall at the front and the front and the back. Just keep it real simple. Are people going to be stronger in the abdominal wall or stronger in the posterior wall of the lower back? Most people are using the lower back and not using their abdominal wall. So you can't tell me your lower back is weak and somehow think that your abs are weak too. It doesn't make sense. Like if one side's short, one side's long.
Yeah.
If one side's overworked, the other side's probably inhibited. So the side, so what you're looking at is perception and then what's actually happening. You just look at the model, the mechanical model in front of you. Now, this is still a mechanical model, and I don't 100% believe the mechanical model, by the way. And I said this at the beginning. I use that as a language to communicate because it's more simple language to most people. But I like to see things in terms of the neurology and the programming. But still, in the end, there's a hardware element as well as a software element. So the idea of a hamstring being tight is normally based on I can't touch my toes. Okay. What are all the factors that come into being able to touch your toes, and how much of it can be related to the hamstrings being tight, and how much of it can be related to how many other things? So just without even, there are too many examples, but I'll just throw you a few of them because otherwise this can go on forever. But just from my experience, it's 13 years or so being a chiropractor, right? And every patient that comes in, one part of the basic assessment is just touch your toes. And they'll be like, oh, I can normally go further. It's like, I don't care how far you can go. I'm not interested in whether you can touch your toes. I am, but that's not my first concern. My first concern is how well do you hinge your hips? If you're a yogi and your back straight, your legs straight, and you just fold forwards, your hips didn't move at all, and then you reach all the way down and stick your head on the floor. Well, congratulations, but you did your hips show me that you don't have naturally don't engage your posterior chain through that movement, generally speaking. And some people just have that, most people have that tendency to just to lean forwards rather than hinge the hips backwards, right? And then when I point that out, so that's terrible. So I score people loosely like 1 to 10. So someone will touch the toes and I'll be like, oh, that's terrible. That's like a 5. They look at me. They're expecting to be congratulated for the toe touch. And look, it's good that you can reach that far. Mobility on its own is not a problem. I'd rather you have mobility, but I want strength and stability with it. So, and I want quality of movement.
Yeah.
So I say, okay, subtracted 5 points because there's 0 hip movement. But the flip side of it is, let's say they can't touch the toes, they move the hips a little bit, whatever. I score them a 5, 6, 7. But that's the thing they think is bad until you get them to do the opposite movement. You're looking at this client or this patient from the side, get them to put their arms up in the air and extend. Lean back as far as you can. And guess what almost everybody does? They hyperextend the lower back. They go, oh, but I've got this pain in my lower back. I'm like, yeah, but you didn't move your hips forward. They say, yeah, it's because I can't because I've got this pressure in my back. I'm like, no, it's because you don't move your hips or they don't extend that you are using overloading, trying to extend your lower back and you feel pressure in your back.
Yeah.
Now, if you respond to the what do I feel is more important than what's actually going on, you'll say, oh, I feel pressure in my back, so I have something wrong with my back. It's like, no, you don't feel your hips, but you have 0 movement. So there are patients who have adjusted their neck and they've managed to touch their toes straight afterwards, first time in their life or in 10 years or whatever.
I remember the video you did with Thomas Demmer, not Thomas Demmer, but yeah, Thomas Delande, sorry.
Yeah.
You did an adjustment, moved his neck, and the degree of on a passive hip test.
Yeah, there was a straight leg raise.
Yeah,
he was a perfect client for that because like I pre-tested everything, and I was like, wait, can we film this? Because I think this is going to be one of those. Like, you don't get, that's not everybody, right?
But I'd be a great example if you ever want to film anything again and win the next. Really good example.
There's a perfect example to show you where range can be acquired by giving the brain a stimulus in some way that you don't think that has nothing to do with the area that you felt the symptom. There are equally patients that you'll adjust an ankle, or you go to adjust the ankle and you do see a change, but from the adjustment, it was like, that wasn't really stuck or blocked. That was just, it totally felt like a loose ankle when you went to adjust. So it's an unstable ankle. You may have seen a change in range or muscle function on the test, but it doesn't mean that it needs more adjusting. Your adjustment was a stimulus, remember. You stimulated that area of the body, you got an outcome that looked good. Now you've got to decide, was that the right stimulus? Was that the optimum stimulus? If it was a wobbly ankle, go stand on one leg and close your eyes, and then you find out the person's got 0 proprioception. That person can't balance for 5 seconds without losing it. They're like, I don't understand. When my eyes are open, it's easy. I'm like, of course, because your visual input gives you about 80% of your general proprioceptive feedback. Close your eyes, and all of a sudden you realize you've got no feedback with your body, or at least with one part of your body's throwing you off. And you get someone to repeat that for a minute, and then all of a sudden they can touch their toes. And it's just whatever it is. It could be dry needling the hip flexor, the TFL, the quad, getting to do a couple of minutes of couch stretch. But every patient that walks in with you, that pain in the hamstring, tightness in the hamstring, or the inability to touch their toes, you can get almost every single one of those people to touch their toes without touching their hamstring or doing a single hamstring stretch. And I haven't done it on anyone in like 13 years. So when I say your hamstrings are not tight, I'm not saying you don't feel tightness. I'm just saying stretching your hamstrings is probably not the thing that's required. Your hamstrings are most likely compensating because, and you said this off air earlier, I think you can word it better than me because it is Ramadan and I'm still dehydrated and I'm trying to be concise, but you said something like that the body is not, basically the nervous system is not adapted to acknowledging that the hamstring can function at that range or that position because they're not practiced in that, right?
It doesn't feel safe, right?
Yeah.
That's why I always use the elastic band analogy. I always like using the guitar analogy. So you've got a guitar string and you try and tighten that guitar string and it feels tight. It doesn't want to move. If I keep tightening that guitar string, and I use this over the band because people get this analogy, if I keep tightening it, what's going to happen? You're worried about the injury because it's tight, but what you're doing with stretching it is just tighten that guitar string more than it needs to be. What you need is to create tautness, loosen that guitar string. And you mentioned about the things involved in the toe touch. I'm in a way, like, as much as I want to prove my function, I don't want to lose this party trick. And my inability to touch my toes and load my hamstrings properly actually is the thing that helps trainers understand this concept. And if I think if I ever start to move well, I'll actually lose this. But I always say when people talk about like stretching, I see them stretching the client's hamstring all the time. I was like, watch this. I'm like, nowhere near the ability to touch my toes. And I'll do one of two things, depending on what I'm trying to get out of this. I'll either release my masseter.
Yep.
And then in turn, which is for people who don't understand, who listen to this, is muscles around your jaw. And I will get 2-3 inches more. Or the one I want to often do now, one, because that sucks and I don't want to do that to myself every time I want a party trick. But the other one I do to try and prove a point of like what you need to do is I'll just do like 30 to 40 bodyweight hip thrusts. Maybe do something to engage the hip flexor, and boom, I'm in. And it shows like I didn't do a single stretch. It's not tight. It's overly lengthened, if anything. If you're looking on that mechanical model that you were talking before, it's an overly lengthened hamstring with the pelvis lean forward.
This is like a really good example to take it away from the mechanical model and actually just introduce a little bit the neurological model, right?
Okay, yeah.
The idea of an input and an output. The output of your hamstring right now might be a level of resting tone and an attention level that generates at a certain range for whatever reason. The input is, and now you've given me 2 examples on 2 different areas of the body. One is releasing a masseter and seeing a change in the functional range of that hamstring, or as we're perceiving the range of the hamstring, your ability to touch your toes. The other one's doing a bunch of hip thrusts. So both of them are positive stimulus to your brain to encourage some kind of a change to whatever that is causing that hamstring tightness. If, however, now we go back to what you said earlier, is that how much do I have to do to fix this? Right? So you're like, well, I still have that problem. And every time I know something that can immediately create a positive change, but it keeps coming back. So then my argument would be like, there are multiple ways to create stimulus that might create the change that you want, but you're looking for the one that fixes the problem. So you're looking for a solution. So if you look at the neurological model, you start looking at all the things that might help versus all the things that don't help. And there'll be sort of an overlap. And you'll start to find out, well, whether I rub this point or poke that point or stretch that point, what do they have in common? What are they all doing in my CNS? Are they all different ways to downregulate something or to upregulate something? So certain points or pressure points around the face, for example, in the jaw, on the base of the neck, stimulate the posterior chain. Other points will downregulate the posterior chain. So maybe you can demonstrate this, and it helps to demonstrate the point that you want to make. But at the same time, you wanting to fix it is saying, okay, I know that these areas upregulate or downregulate these areas of the body. So if I actually had a client that I wanted to kind of get better engagement here or disengage something that was dominating too much, you can use these kind of little tricks. But stimulating the TMJ, for example, you might just have a TMJ problem. You might need an adjustment. You might need to get into the pterygoid muscles inside. There might be a dental alignment issue. There's a cross-bite or an overbite. So there are people, you go and get the appropriate type of brace set done, and over a period of time, that eliminates the problem completely. It might mean because that area around the TMJ and the upper neck are so integrated, you might just need to adjust your neck or get your neck adjusted. The flip side of it is maybe not even adjusting the neck. Maybe your deep neck flexors don't work very well. So how do you get your deep neck flexors to work? Okay, there's a series of rehab exercises. But before you go into trying to strengthen them or engage them, what could disengage them? So maybe your suboccipitals.
Yeah.
And what can calm the suboccipital out? Maybe an adjustment. So it might lead to get your neck or TMJ adjusted. Start doing some regular suboccipital release. Then move into and integrate with that some deep neck flexor work. Over a period of, say, 4 weeks, it should provide sustainable change in the hamstring range. And if it doesn't, it will have had positive benefit. It won't be a waste. But you move into the next thing. So, well, your glute bridges or your hip thrusts, you're upregulating the posterior chain muscles. What could inhibit them? So you could start looking at doing a couch stretch or something equivalent over a period of a month, 2 months, 3 months to see if you get sustainable change. If it improves, but it starts tightening up again, maybe your body's trying to protect something. Maybe you have an unstable pelvis. maybe there's something going on in your hip that's just been missed out. So for the most part, like when you do come across these patterns, you could just start with consistently releasing the masseter, doing the glute bridges, and then starting your workout. And let's say it's stiff-legged deadlifts or Romanian deadlifts or whatever, something like a deep squat, something that will put your hips through range. And now by reintegrating that movement at an improved range of motion, your CNS also has a chance to memorize that. That might be on its own enough to get rid of the problem. But if it doesn't get rid of the problem, it just means the source of the problem still has not been found.
Yeah, and you can cross that one off the list, and that's when it comes to retest.
It still eliminates, any one of those still shows it's not like, by the way, I'm giving you all of this and you're like, but what if it's just a hamstring? Yeah, every one of these patients I'm talking about has tried stretching their hamstrings. Let me just throw that in there. I still have yet to see a single patient that told me that they had super tight hamstrings and they got rid of it permanently by stretching the hamstrings for a period of time. I haven't witnessed that yet. So if I'm wrong, or I haven't given you the best solution, or even in your case, let's say you have some temporary solution, but you haven't found the result, that's fine. But it still doesn't mean that stretching the hamstrings will work, because I just haven't seen it. And there'll be somebody out there in the world where it will work. There might be some set of physical biomechanical circumstances that actually is the right thing for that person, or it could be part of their solution.
Yeah. The only one I see, like I haven't seen anyone stretch the hamstrings to get a better result. But the only time sometimes I get people that say it has worked, often are people that say, oh my God, this is what happens when it's 1:30 a.m. here. What is the exercise where someone's holding a dumbbell, they're rounding their spine and they're going off a step and they're curling Jefferson curl. And oftentimes people look at a Jefferson curl as something that elongates the hamstrings. Where you mentioned earlier on how many things are involved in a toe touch, and that is curling thoracic spine. You've got the neck that's going to be involved in that. So you're going to follow how the movement of the lumbar spine is going to work, the movement of the hip, and actually rotating from the pelvis. That isn't a hamstring stretch. That's integrated movements.
It's still some form of a deadlift. It's like you can't touch your toes, but you can do a Romanian deadlift with this range of motion. Train up to the limit of your range or just slightly before it, and over time, just by engaging the muscles with good control and good core stability, you might find, in some people, that you'll just over time be able to increase the range. It's like squatting in a wide stance. Everyone can't do it straight away. They'll say, oh, I feel my adductors. It's like, yeah, they just haven't moved through range. You'll be sore. Don't go too wide too quickly. Just go gradually wider week by week. And then if you're using a box, go slightly lower. You'll adapt to it. It's a loaded movement, which is a hell of a lot more effective in most things than just holding a random passive stretch just because it feels like it's tight.
I also suppose that when you're looking at adductors as well, looking at that perspective, is the adductors feeling tight? Is that an adductor tightness in the same way of hamstrings? Or are we looking at something like in a deep squat, your adductors are, quite big hip extensors. So are they weak as piss in the bottom of a squat? And we're back to the same hamstring problem again.
Well, you can look at it this way. Adductors, especially if it relates to doing like a sumo stance, it's just not a range. We don't move our hips into that range ever. I mean, we really just focus on this linear forward, backward thing. I like to think to create a fairly bulletproof body, your baseline foundation, you want to become strong and proficient in something kind of shoulder stance, narrow, like a regular stance, if you call it that, a wide stance. It doesn't have to be as wide as I squat and comp, but it just has to be medium wide. And wider if you can. You optimize the range that your body has accessible. Some people are really, really well suited to wide, so they should use it. And then don't force it if you're not well built for it, but wide. And then split stance, narrow, split, and wide. You've got the three key planes. So this is still static lifting. We're not talking about rotational and lateral and dynamic work. If you're going to lift and basically just do nothing but static work your whole life, at least be good in all three planes.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Some of it.
Yeah.
And use a little bit of the others.
With the hip flexor, because you mentioned earlier on, and this is a term you mentioned right at the start of this podcast, and I say this in every show, like people are probably bored of me saying this, but it's incredible how podcasts always come full circle. I've never done one in 60-odd episodes where it has not come back to the start. But you mentioned earlier on about hamstrings being tight, and you've also mentioned hamstrings being weak. And that would almost in some ways sound counterintuitive. And on one argue one argue you've mentioned the couch stretch, which is something to elongate the front of the hip.
Yeah.
But if you actually look from the mechanical model, bringing this all together, most people have an overextension of the lumbar spine to create a level of balance because their pelvis is anteriorly tilted, which means their rib cage is going to be flared. With the psoas attaching on and stabilizing the lumbar spine, probably as much as it actually has a role in hip flexion. Could you make the same argument about the hip flexor as you can with the hamstrings? That rather than stretching them, you actually can stabilize by pulling the rib cage down.
There's a lot to unpack in that, because I have to, I mean, this for me to be completely on my opinion on it.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's say there's one point and then there's the unpacking of what you said. The one point is I've stated the perception of feeling tight hamstrings, but generally considering average person's day-to-day life and functional capabilities and the way they train hamstrings are probably grossly weak and underdeveloped. The other side, I think I mentioned earlier about the hip flexor being tight, but also being weak. Okay, so I said the hip flexors are weak and the hip extensors are weak. Why is everything weak? Well, I'll give you an example. One is lengthened and weak, and one is short and weak. Okay. So you see what I'm saying? Like in a way, we look at the hip flexors as the dominant side. We're going to say that people are more likely to be quad dominant. The average client walks in off a desk at 30, 40 years old, starts working out. You're going to watch the weight. When you load them, put them in a squat, see where they go. When the weights get heavy enough or they get tired, what are they going to favor? The stronger muscle, the more easy to use, the path of least resistance. So it's going to be the anterior, just about everyone. So how am I saying that a hip flexor is weak yet tight and that a hamstring is weak yet tight? Well, I don't believe the hamstring's tight. No. So I'm saying the hamstring is like a long tight. And the solution to a long tight is to strengthen and engage it through contraction, through work, through load. The hip flexor I'm saying is short tight. No muscle functions properly in its shortest state or in its most lengthened state. So there are many ways to inhibit a muscle. And being lengthened chronically and being shortened chronically are both valid ways to cause inhibition and some degree of weakness on a functional level. So if you're just using basic muscle testing, a lot of people, their hip flexors are shut down as well. But I don't want to load them into the position that they constantly sitting in all day long, because that's already the adaptation. They don't have an adaptation to use that hip flexor through a lengthened state, just as a way that they don't have the ability to use a hamstring through its contractive state. So stretching a hip flexor, stretching a short tight muscle should improve its ability to perform in a strength capacity, as well as uninhibiting the antagonistic muscle that it might be causing weakness through inhibition. You see what I'm going with this?
Yeah.
So going back to what I said I needed to unpack. So this is the pelvic tilt thing. I've got a different opinion on this.
Ooh, interesting. I like this.
Okay, so the pelvic tilt is the, I don't want to call it like the magic unicorn. Everyone believes in it, but it doesn't exist. It exists. There's such a thing as a pelvic tilt, but I think it's overemphasized and almost overdiagnosed, because the classic pelvic tilt thing is, from what I've seen, I've heard more pelvic tilts diagnosed from personal trainers than anyone else. So I don't think there's anything inherently grossly wrong with it, because as long as the consequences of what you're going to do following that observation are the right thing. So let's say you see what you believe to be a pelvic tilt and you go, all right, well, your hip flexors are tight, they need stretching, and your glutes are weak and they need strengthening. But great, end result, most people need some of that. Most people, most of the time, are going to benefit from that, whether that's the full protocol or not. But you're on the right track. So, but when you look at MRIs, so the pelvic tilt implies that there's an increased lumbar curvature. Is that correct?
Yeah, normally would assume so, right?
Well, I moved away from these terminologies. I don't need people like, oh, have I got a scoliosis? I'm like, I didn't even check. I don't care. I just checked things worked and didn't work and found things that got them working. You feel better and everything's working. You can do a squat. Yeah, I don't care if you've got scoliosis or not. It's irrelevant. I'm not going to try and, what do you think of my posture? I'm like, I don't really care. I'm not trying to fix your posture. Your posture is a product of the things you do over a period of time and will change with your habits to a point, and may or may not change that much, but it's not my problem. Like, I'm not concerned with your posture. Like, it's really not you see what I'm saying? So
yeah, 100%.
The pelvic tilt thing is almost like a postural diagnosis. Posture gives you information. Posture and structure and mechanics, or structure gives you some information about mechanics, or can allude to the idea that, you are rounded in your shoulders, so you're probably going to be tight here. You're probably going, but it's not an absolute, because you see people with horrendous postures that function perfectly well. There's so many sprinters, Olympic level sprinters, like I might add, that I've worked with, that have what looks to me like pelvic tilt performing on that level. I'm like, I haven't really seen anyone like properly fix one. Like
Usain Bolt with the scoliosis.
Yeah,
Michael Phelps, massive kyphosis.
Okay,
best athletes in the world.
Okay, so going back, so the concept of what is pelvic tilt? I haven't seen an MRI that I can't recall off the top of my head the last time I saw an MRI on a lumbar spine that said that there was an increased lordosis. So this pelvic tilt is apparently a pandemic more than COVID. Because everyone's literally got one, apparently. And yet, if a pelvic tilt is the way the textbook tells you what pelvic tilt is, we should be seeing an epidemic of increased lumbar lordosis. Almost exclusively every single, almost every single report that I've ever seen on an MRI starts with the words, there is a loss of normal lumbar lordosis, and then indicative of muscle spasm, which is always what they attribute loss of lordosis. If it's a loss of cervical lordosis in the neck, that's usually concluded on the report that's probably to do with spasm. That's how they always word it. But you just don't see a lot of hyperlordotic people walking around. There are people, they exist. It's not non-existent. It's just they're not that common. Now, here's the thing. What are we seeing that we're interpreting as a pelvic tilt? Again, it's just terminology, and if you really care to debate the words or not, I don't, but I like to just have a thought that makes sense, that leads me to go and find the solutions that are going to get the result. And pelvic tilt, I'd prefer to use the word of pelvic shift. So does it matter in the wording? No, but what I'm observing that I find important is if I look at someone from the side, do I see that trochanter of their hip is kind of vertically aligned with the malleolus of the ankle? Most people, it shifts forwards. So it's like a swaying of the hips forward.
Yeah. And
in that, the pelvic tilt's more like rotating a stick in your butt back behind you. And if you actually, we always see what we want to see, like me included, like, and this is like the part of being self-reflective through your own work and your own analysis is like, am I just seeing what I want to see? Like sometimes I really have to, I check myself as often as I can. Sometimes I see a patient, maybe I'm being a bit lazy. I might just, all right, I know what it is. I'm just go lie down and I'm just almost trying to find the things that I decided that I'm going to find. And sometimes I catch myself like in some of the trickier cases, I'm like, wait, I'd like close. Sometimes I'm checking a leg length. I just close my eyes. I'm like, don't look, just see what you can see. Because it's really hard to have a formula that works a lot. And then someone comes along and doesn't fit.
Yeah. And
you have to check yourself, go, maybe I don't know the answer, or maybe I've got to think of a new one. So I would encourage anybody who feels they're seeing an epidemic of pelvic tilts to just have a look at the positioning of the trochanter of the hip in alignment with the malleolus, and just keep calling it pelvic tilt. It's fine, but just consider how much of a shift is in there. Because in there, like, look at the movement. So we want someone to hip hinge. So we want them to be able to position their hips posteriorly to move backwards. And if person is over-engaged at the front, under-engaged at the back, they might have a tendency to sway towards the area of strength. You see someone squat down and the hips are shifting forward, the knees are moving forward. It's an orientation. Which way is my body orientating itself? If someone comes in angling this way or that way, why might that be? It might just be an indication of habit, like a person who sits with the left shoulder up in the air, the right shoulder slightly dropped. That looks like that driving position we talked about where they stick the left hand on the wheel. I'll ask them, do you drive a lot? If they tell me, yes, I drive 6 hours a day. All right, good. We found there's a useful piece of information on the end of that observation that might relate to the first thing I'm going to ask them to have a think about. Like, can you put your hand on the bottom of the wheel and let's just start to make micro adjustments that are easy to make, in your day-to-day habits, so we can start seeing a change. But whether or not the pelvis is tilted or shifted, who cares? The bottom line is, if you're just working as a personal trainer, let's say, you're not going to do therapy, but your training is therapy. If you're making smart decisions and about the exercise selection, the range of motion that you choose to go with, how hard you want to and how often you want to train something, you're going to look for the areas that they're weaker in. All you really need to do is put them through a series of movements and see what they suck at and what they don't suck at, and then you're going to find your answer. And then provided it's quite clear this person can't hip hinge or doesn't toe touch very well, or technique breaks down on XYZ movement, you'll know which exercises to supplement as accessories and which ones to work more on the technique rather than the weight. And you decide, hey, I've done this for a month and you just really aren't able to connect this area. Maybe it's time I refer you to a chiropractor or a physio, someone that you maybe know and trust well with the mechanics. It can give them a little bit of help for that body to just start being able to do that. So they come back to you, and then the training you're doing was the right thing. It just works better now.
Yeah,
and becomes part of the solution.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And the thing is, like, you know, we all go down that route of almost overanalyzing it, where a little bit of information sometimes can be a dangerous thing, rather than actually go, right, what is the easiest? What would this look like if it was easy?
You know what? One of the biggest compliments I ever got in this industry was that Luke Lehman quoted me.
Wow.
Yeah. I have to think back. It might have been through Facebook, which I haven't really been using for the last 5 years.
I remember this.
It was a passing conversation when we met in London, I believe. And then I didn't know that stuck with him. But anyway, he quoted me on it. And I was like, man, that's like the highlight of me. So I'm kind of in the fitness industry. I'm not really. I'm a chiropractor. I've worked with UP. I've worked with Olympic teams and specialists and sports athletes, so on. So like, yeah, I'm dabbling and I compete in powerlifting. So I'm kind of like on the fence with, like, I know people like yourself and both sides of things, right? And so Luke was someone I was a pleasure to get to know this guy and consider him a friend.
Yeah, I love Luke.
It's not like we speak regularly, but I'll always have time for Luke. But anyway, back to the quote. The quote was, I said something like, to teach this much, you need to know this much. Yeah. So if anyone listening, it's like, to teach this 1% of information, you need this 100% of it. Or, to teach a tiny amount, you need to know a lot more than that. So that's like, you give a lecture for an hour, that's probably 100 hours worth of knowledge to be able to explain that 1 hour properly. When you only know that piece of information and you don't know the rest of it, you don't know the context, the dynamic of it, you're not very good at teaching it. You don't really understand it. So it's like this, knowledge is power, but little knowledge is also pretty dangerous in the wrong hands.
I think it's such an important point. And I'm doing this for 11 years now, and I can still consider myself a on the beginner side of intermediate, because it's that's a thing where the more you learn, the more you realize there is to learn. I always feel like a beginner, but when you talk to Luke. Well, I know. Luke,
and you feel like nothing.
Well, this is the thing. Well, I talk about imposter syndrome a lot on this channel, because it's something that comes up with everybody. It's something we all face, and I always reframe my imposter syndrome as like, if I didn't have that level of dissatisfaction, I would have never have got to where I am. I would have been more complacent. And I was like, you never really get rid of things like that, because like when I started, these people I was looking up to and surrounding myself with had this level of knowledge. And then I got smarter and I started hanging out with Luke Lehman and Jordan Shallow and chatting to yourself. And I'm like, right, okay, I've got the ceiling's just grown, 100 feet. But it's, I think it's amazing. I'm working in now multiple countries, educating trainers in multiple countries. And you sort of see this trend of people who are newer to it, and they're explaining something like a calorie deficit or a split squat. And it's like 400 Qs, or it's this and this and this muscle and this muscle and this muscle. And I catch myself doing it whenever I'm at the end of my knowledge gap and trying to explain something. I will over-explain it. But something I know well, one sentence I'm off. Or an exercise I'm really good at, I can get it in less than 3 Qs with everybody. And I always think my biggest compliment is when I can get to a point where I can say very little and get the job done and be efficient.
I think I can relate this to, even this podcast right now. Like the last time we did a podcast was a while ago, but my hesitancy to answer a question in absolute terms, even when I'm clarifying that, like, I'm talking in biomechanical model, because I already know, I can already think of 100 counter arguments to what I'm saying before I'm saying it, even if no one's going to come at me. And then when I switch to sort of using the version of what I'm calling the neurological model, I know people that know way more. I got a friend in Portugal, Nelson. I don't know if you're watching this. Maybe I'll tag him in it. He's done more than 700 hours of postgraduate study in functional neurology. And when I'm talking functional neurology, I'm talking about somebody's had a car accident and busted their brain in and can't walk properly. Here's the guy that's going to figure out steps to get that person's brain to be as re-educated as possible to recover. Now, if I learn something from someone like him, or I just take a nugget of information that just makes me think a bit better, I'll use it. I'm not going to claim that I know what he knows. And at the same time, there was a time, even let's say, I was posting articles on an old Facebook page, which I have probably long since abandoned as well. I haven't got time for it, and I just didn't continue. But back then, I was trying to hit home with more like your hamstrings are not tight. That was like me trying to like say, look, there's another way of looking at things. I'm trying to share knowledge for free for some of these revelations, but at the same time, the pendulum for me had also swung somewhat to the end as well, and it keeps going. Here's an off topic slightly.
Yeah.
If you've never done therapy, worked with a psychologist and just gone and deeply reflected upon yourself, you don't realize how much you're holding yourself back. Because one of the things is we all, like most people, are driven. This is a Tony Robbins thing as well, being driven out of these emotional needs. And one of them is significance. We all want to feel important. Everyone's trying to reinvent the wheel because everyone wants to gain a piece of that significance. Mm-hmm. It's very hard. Like I can tell you where I learned everything from. I didn't invent any of this. I learned each thing from different people. If there was something I kind of came up with by myself, I'll tell you I came up with it by myself. I might call it the Hassan Special or something, but I'll know someone else probably also came up with it. I just didn't know about it. But most of the time, 90% of the time, 99% of the time, if you right now expand your knowledge, let's say Luke's one of the smartest people in the fitness industry, if not the guy. Luke will still talk to me and ask me about that whenever we've spoken, ask me about things that are my specialization, and listen. That's why he's smart. Yeah. Even though I know this guy, if I go into his field, I can sit there and listen to him for 100 years and I won't learn everything he knows. But the guy has learned his information from other people. And so it's not like some people are just better at expressing information. Some people are just easier to listen to. I really don't know. It might not be that easy to listen to. I'm not, just as a person, not very good at sticking to the point sometimes. I think when you're saying something, I'm thinking of 5 things that I want to talk about. There's that point. And I'm like, okay, start with this one. And my brain ends up, and from that point, I've gone into 5. I know what I need to do.
Yeah.
My own powerlifting results can speak for themselves, or my results with patients. But when it comes to like being a good conveyor of information, I don't know that I'm that good at that. Maybe I'm just not very good at that. I have to sit down and think, okay, if I was to do another podcast and I would listen to people's feedback, I say, okay, like if I want to give information to help somebody out there to learn something that might help them or their clients, like I still have to think constantly back on myself. Like I might know everything. I might just not be very good at teaching it. Mm. Or, like my opinion today, you ask me tomorrow the same questions. I had a thought actually. I'm sorry, I could be wrong about that. And just be willing to just constantly go back and go, who does it serve to never be wrong?
Yeah, I think you're better than you think you are here. But I think, it's interesting that you bring that up. And, it goes back to that same point I had with imposter syndrome, like me not thinking it's a bad thing. And it's that ability to be able to reflect and take your ego out of the equation. Like we said back at the start, when it comes to actually lifting load, and it's that, it's funny you brought up the topic of therapy, because it's something that literally I was having this conversation with my partner today. Like my fiance has OCD and she's been having therapy for many, many years. Mm-hmm. And it was something I was looking at touching on at some point very soon. I've not really explored it. And I had a couple of mates that, have no real mental health issues, but they've explored it for exactly that reason, just to get themselves out of their own way.
Mental health issues.
Huh?
Everybody's got mental health issues.
Exactly. And generally that's the thing I think is really interesting. It's mental health issues. It's a massive spectrum. Like today, and you're the first person outside my family that actually know this. Today is a very big day in the sense that I have an official diagnosis of ADHD at the age of 30, almost 32, for the first time in my life, and that puts a lot of clarity into a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And it shows, for me, that just shows the power of what is capable. I don't consider me having ADHD is a bad thing. I don't look at this diagnosis as something wrong with me. I'm like, okay, this has made me creative. It's probably the reason why I've been able to deep focus on some things, and probably the reason why I'm useless at other things. But it shows me the scope that I have, whether that's through medication and now using Ritalin, or whether that's through therapy, and most likely a combination of both.
This is like know thyself. If you didn't have a diagnosis, would it make it any different? I mean, it might make it better for you to have a diagnosis. Okay, I know what I'm dealing with. But let's just say, like, for everyone who thinks that they don't have anything wrong with them at all, how well do people know themselves? Like, you couldn't, maybe we just don't have enough diagnostic names, but if you wanted to create enough, everybody could fall in one personality category or another. So in your case, you go like, okay, I've been given this diagnosis. Now what can I do with it? Like, this gives me a bit of better knowledge about myself. That's something I can reflect upon. I go, someone's guided me. It's like if you didn't have a diagnosis of diabetes, but you were kind of pre-diabetic, you still would have benefited from doing those things that would be good for a diabetic, like changing your diet and exercising. So if every single one of us just presumed that we're all required to work on our mental health just the same way, like if we don't work on our physical health or we neglect our physical health, we end up with a diagnosis.
Yeah.
We end up with an illness.
But it's amazing sometimes how working on yourself and how much of a wider impact that actually can have on your life. We've talked about dysfunction in this episode and all the physical things we can do in terms of strengthening and stretching and mobility and stability. And we've never even we've touched briefly on there is a mental component to this, but not even in the extent of even gone as far to say of there's a mental component to this in the sense of how your mood affects your dysfunction. Like I've known it where I've done table tests. You test people's strength in their lats and you tell them to think of something sad and gone. Mm-hmm. I remember vividly for me, this is this actually brought up when you mentioned earlier on, it's like there's not a drug that makes you feel like powerlifting. And I was like, the closest is probably LSD. But I remember on an experience with that. And I remember coming towards the end of a trip with a few mates, and I just went and I put my arm overhead and I just reached over and felt my chest, and I felt like it was a hole in the side of my arm. I thought, am I hallucinating? Like, I feel like I'm grabbing into my chest. I went, no, it's just not inhibited anymore. It now moves how it should do. All it's changed is had a release of stress.
Yeah.
And I could have done that through meditation, therapy, like insert thing that calms you down here. The power of it from a mobility standpoint, as well as a mental standpoint, is vast.
I would go further and say, look, I started using a therapist about 3 years ago. Probably in the last year, I've only actually did a session a few weeks ago, maybe 2-3 weeks ago. And that was the first one in about 6 months. And the one before was like 6 months before that. But that was a 2-year period. At first, I showed up. I don't need this. I don't have any problems. I'm just here to see what can I get out of it. That's how I started. And then I was like, once we started to unpack things and clear things out, it was like, all right, it's like I was blind my whole life. I never understood anything. I was repeating the same patterns again and again. And if anyone would do this, you'll find out your life. Anything you see that's a problem in your life and you realize that, we look externally, like the problems all are out there. Like, I'm unhappy because he did or she did or this or that. Like, when was the last time you felt like that? And you're like, oh, that was a few years ago when this happened. When was the last time? A few years ago. Okay, wait, this is a pattern. So some of that's got to come from you, right? And then when it comes to health, and I treat physically with my hands. It's not like I don't work on my patients with my hands or I'm ignoring the physical part, but 80% of all the things that I see, of all the injuries, I think you can attribute them to an emotional root cause. And it sounds hippie, and I'm totally was never educated that way. I didn't believe that. I was the last one of the last people that was going to accept such a thing. I would have said, stress, that loose, broad umbrella term stress, like all stress is suddenly the same. There's as if the feeling of inadequacy or versus depression versus, but I name all the positive, jealousy, anger, name any negative emotion. They're all versions of a stress. But if we just call everything stress and wipe them as if, paint them all with the same brush, then we're not really, it's like saying pain, like pain where? Yeah. You ask a patient, where's the pain? Well, if it doesn't matter, then why would I do a diagnosis or why would I do a consultation? Like, what makes it better? What makes it worse? What position hurts? What relieves? Is it sharp? Is it burning? Is it shooting? Is it tingling? Is it aching? Is it throbbing? Like, these are all just because you use that, like that physical information that you're trying. Well, it's not physical because, again, you have receptors for touch, pressure, stretch. You don't have a receptor for pain. There is no pain receptor. They used to call it a pain receptor in the old days, and then they changed it to nociceptors. I don't know if that's been further revised and maybe I've missed out, but last time I knew they were called nociceptors because and when you stimulate a nociceptor, it stimulates the perception of pain. If I put a finger on your shoulder right now and touch your shoulder, you'll feel touch. If I push a little harder, you might feel pressure. If I push hard enough, you might feel pain. But you don't feel touch, pressure, and pain. You feel my finger. It was finger, finger, finger. Okay. Your interpretation changed from touch, pressure to pain.
And that's what every person that you'll see will have a different requirement of touch to feel pain. Like, I've done it with a caliber reading. Someone takes a caliber reading and they're like, ow. I'm like, well, there's barely a touch there. Yeah. And another person, you can properly grab them and they don't feel the same.
I give you one thing I remember from sociology lessons at university. There was a professor there who was an ex-boxer. He used to guest box on behalf of the Marines. He sounded like a proper geezer. He didn't. I hope you wouldn't mind if you heard me saying it. He didn't sound like a very smart guy, but he was super smart, right? And he made some comment. He said that smoking reduces your life expectancy by 10 years. Depression reduces it by 20. So you might as well smoke and be happy. So it's not to say that smoking makes you happy or whatever, but it's the relative. We all know smoking's bad. We all know smoking's dangerous. Smoking causes cancer. Smoking, all the negatives of smoking. But do you know that depression will end your life much earlier than smoking? And that's just, again, another umbrella term, depression. Like, okay, let's say it is itself a diagnosis, but stress is just. So if I have a patient who says, I woke up and I couldn't move my neck, I'll be like, cool, so what did you do? Nothing. Okay, well, how was it the day before? Fine. Okay, well, did you do anything different? Did you change your workout? Did you do any new activity? No, nothing. Okay. How have your stress levels been recently? Oh, terrible. Okay. And I always ask, I'm not going to sit there and probe into everybody's life, but I will ask because probably it's more relevant than whatever they think is going on in their neck. 9 times out of 10, as long as I ask and they don't feel pressured, most people will, do you know what? When this problem happened, it was like this. I said, have you had this before? Be like, 2 years ago. Or it happens every last 2-3 years. Well, okay, would you remember the last time it happened? What was going on in your life? Like, so for some people, you see the penny drop and they're like, yeah, every time. And then they're like, cool, it's that. And you can put your hands on someone's back and feel a certain type of tension. You're like, I know from experience, this has never gone away with adjusting. In fact, some of these people I can't crack anything on them. Stretching won't work. Massage won't work. I'll probably tell them to take a lot of magnesium and I'll see that dies down a fair bit. But what personalities come in with what types of problems? Very, very quiet people are more likely to come in with headaches. And headaches are from what I've read, headaches are supposed to relate to anger. And it's never someone that looks angry.
Yeah.
It's not the person who goes to work and shoots everybody at work and then turns the last bullet on themselves. It's never the loud person that spoke out. It's always the one we never expected. It's like that. No, they were always so quiet. We didn't think anything was wrong. They never said anything, So it's whatever emotions are internalized, they're going to affect your body. And I'm sure when if you're preparing someone for a shoot, you want to get their stress. You do your supplementation protocol and diet protocol. You look at stress. Because they're not going to get as lean if they're stressed, right? If they're super carb depleted, they're sleeping poorly and their stress is up and they're overtraining, they might not lose those last few pounds and look good. You might feed them a few extra carbs one day, tell them to cut the cardio or the training for a few days, and then suddenly they come in looking great. Why? But it's a literal example of how what's going on in here has a physical, tangible physical change in your body. Just like if you're crying and you go to the doctor saying some water is coming from my eyes and I don't know what's wrong with my eye. You can do every eye test and every MRI and scan and find out your eyes are absolutely fine. If no one cared that you were upset, they'd just be like, you're making it up or it's in your head, which triggers loads of people to say that.
I mean, before I unpack that, I tell you what, it's my absolute sure determination to make myself as cancelable as possible. That when we talked about the quiet people getting headaches and you made the example of someone going in with a gun and turning the gun on themselves, my first thought was, well, that will definitely give you a headache. But okay. But moving on to a less cancelable.
Get rid of the headache.
Maybe true. But it's so true. There was a couple of things that I thought about during that. So one of the girls I work with is sponsored by a new supplement company. She's sponsored by a few, new one, pretty good. And it's this product called Hardcore. And it's this like cutting agent, what it calls. And she's like, she gave me like, oh, do you want to check out what's the ingredients on here? I was like, is this going to be caffeine, stimulatory, things like this? No, it's 5-HTP, it's theanine, it's things that, ashwagandha, it's things that calm the central nervous system. And in that exactly that point, it's like, it's not a fat loss agent. It's a cortisol buffer. It's a stress management tool. It's a nervous system down regulator.
Much better approach, I would imagine.
I would think so. It's certainly a much more long-term approach without crashing your adrenals one way, left or right. But, the other one I thought of a client. It's this client of mine who she's gone through a pretty traumatic thing a few years ago. And she comes in with complaining a lot of neck pain, and like no therapist been able to sort it out. And she's come to me, and I sat down. I looked through her, and we haven't been able to sort it because I think this is beyond my remit, and I'll work what I can. I'll work around. But I started to notice when I was doing some sessions whilst we were in lockdown here, and I was stretching outside, come around and she was showing me like all her son's Lego that she'd done. I'm like, why is your son not doing his own Lego? And I started to piece together that she's finding distraction from the things she doesn't want to think about. So she's always on edge and amped up. And I got a text message saying, one day, because I woke up on my neck, like your example, my neck's really bad. It's really in pain. I don't know if I can come in and train. I'm like, okay. And the question I asked is, could you precisely tell me where is it that hurts? Mm. And I got the longest essay I've ever received in my life over WhatsApp. Pages and pages and pages. And at not one point did she mention her neck. It was this person order, this person order. This was stressful. This was stressful. A kid was doing this. And I looked and went, that's why your neck hurts. I just went, read that back and tell me again why your neck hurts.
It's amazing that you need to tell someone to read it back, but that's how our minds work when we're in those moments. We don't see sometimes what's blindingly obvious. It's like the brain is not designed to make us happy. It's designed for survival. So we're instinctively looking to protect ourselves, and our childhood experiences in particular are the imprint in our nervous system patterns and behaviors that tell us that we're safe or not safe. Whether you're safe in a relationship or safe around people or safe in public, it's like the same. One of the reasons people get so scared of public speaking is because it's hardwired in our DNA. We don't want to be ostracized from society because that would lead to death. If the tribe would reject us, it puts us in a possible, in a situation where we might feel risk, that of being shut down from everyone if we somehow stumbled in front of all these people. It's like if you've never looked into this before, just like an example of what you can do is think of any and every injury you've ever had, or any time you've been sick in your life. Just map it out on a timeline for whatever the key events that you can remember without justifying them or trying to explain them. Just map out every time you were sick or got injured or had pain, and put another timeline, just superimpose a separate timeline of all these key events in your life. Like get married, get divorced, started a new job, graduate, lost a job. They don't even have to all be superficially negative events. They could be events that could seem very positive, like getting a raise. I don't know.
Starting a business. Positive stress in a lot of ways.
Yeah, just like being promoted. You might be like getting the dream job you always wanted, achieving a goal in the sport, reaching a goal. You have no idea. You might be more scared to reach that goal because you define and know yourself as a person as someone who only struggles, that always has your back against the wall. And you know how to exist that way because you've learned that. The moment things are going well, your brain's like, I need it to go wrong. You'll find a way for it to go wrong. You fail, you get injured, or you'll attract drama. that you don't need in your life, but you will need it because your subconscious only knows how to operate and be successful maybe when you're struggling. It's not everybody. I'm giving you just an example. But if you map out, and it's just this is hard, but it's brutal honesty, self-honesty. You have to, when you said I'm gonna do therapy or try that, I'm gonna do that with the intention to be as coachable as possible, or as you want to go there like I'm ready to accept that I'm probably gonna have to change probably is going to be difficult. I have to literally go against or look at things that I'm this way because my survival mechanisms have decided that this is the way I need to be. But I'm seeing and experiencing pain, and therefore I'm going to have to say, maybe there's another way. Maybe I need to let go of something that I've learned. But you have to be able to see it. So everybody doesn't dive on this. You tell someone, like this lady may have seen your point, but like, you're absolutely right. I can see. I don't know if she gave you that answer, but it's the same.
You've got to be ready, right? As you say, it's so hard to make big changes, especially if the change. And I think for me, going to therapy, I'd like to think that it's not some hidden trauma event that I don't know, but some people are very obvious things that they don't want to deal with, and that is harder than the thought of living with the discomforts that they're having now are symptoms of this. Well, you have to be ready to approach them.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, most of the significant psychological belief structures that we've got, or belief systems that we have in our subconscious that we are basically operating on without realizing, the dysfunctional ones pretty much all come from some form of trauma, something that was perceived as a form of trauma. So it's, but at the same time, like the reason person will avoid that is because that's going to trigger pain. And usually the people who are likely to take the steps towards rectifying and going into that have to have reached enough pain in their present life to be like, right, it can't be any worse. Like, I've reached rock bottom. I have nothing to lose. So it's like, you've gone to your limit before, and this is unfortunate. It takes a lot for someone to. It takes something special for someone to want to go, I don't think I've got anything wrong. I'm going to go, and there needs to be some agenda or something pressing you strongly enough where your subconscious is going to weigh it up and go, what have I got to lose? I might find out something. It can only benefit me.
Yeah.
But if it's going to hurt, I'd rather not know it. I'll just stick with the pain. It's like you've got a crappy job. You hate your boss. You're not getting paid enough. You can barely pay the bills, but you won't quit your job. And it actually comes to a point where you can't pay your bills and you can see everything going down, and you still don't quit your job. You still don't go. It's like, because you might be programmed, your need for certainty. It's the other very common need that we operate. There's significance and certainty. And when you're dealing with a client like this lady, for example, she's going to need either certainty or significance for whatever reason. And without judgment, they're just part of our human needs. But if you're a person who's heavily oriented towards the need for certainty, let's say your childhood, you grew up with so much uncertainty, you'll gravitate more heavily to that which gives you certainty. And a crap job with crap pay, with coworkers and a boss that you hate, at least you know exactly what you're going to get every morning. You are certain of how crap your day is going to be. You can wake up in the morning feeling crap. You can go to work feeling crap. You can come home and rant to your partner about how crap your day was. But you know exactly what you're getting. And the fear of uncertainty or variety or change is like, well, it could be even worse. So you'll stay with the thing that hurts you this much for fear, the perceived fear that you don't want to go into is going to hurt even more. And the other part, the significance is, I'm in pain. Look at me, I'm suffering. Maybe especially as a mother with a young kid, it's very common. A lot of mothers have this, what I call mum guilt. You ask a lot of mothers who've just had a baby, they feel guilty. A lot of them do. I asked them, 9 out of 10 will say, yeah, it's true. They really jump on board. It's like, I say, all right, so you've got the hardest job. You're a mum. And they all agree. And you're like, well, you have to take care of the kid and maybe even take care of your husband and maybe even the in-laws. And like, yeah, it's true. And I said, you're not even getting paid for it. They're like, yeah, it's true. It's like they just want someone to acknowledge that they do this thankless task for all these people. And on top of it, they feel guilty to take 30 minutes to go for a coffee or go to the gym or spend time with a friend. If they spend 1 second away from their kid, they're a bad mother, which they wouldn't tell someone else. But it's a self-imposed learned belief that's come from somewhere, wherever it's come from. So If that person needs time for themselves, needs a sense of significance, the only way they might be able to get it is in a crisis. The only way they'd be able to get that attention that's needed without feeling guilt is a significant enough crisis. Like, I'm in a medical emergency right here. I need to get out the house, and I leave the kid with my partner, whoever, and I'm going to go to a doctor today or see a chiropractor. And it's like the emotional need needs to be served more than the physical need. You can't tell that person who's driven in that direction that this is nothing serious, don't worry, everything will be fine. They don't want to hear that. They want you to tell them how bad it is. You have to tell them that it's bad. Another person who needs the certainty more than they need the significance, don't tell them it's bad. Tell them, I've seen 10 of these today. This is nothing. You'll be fine. They're like, oh my God, thank you. I say, like, don't worry, you don't need surgery and you're not going to die. Ha ha ha. And you see people get better on the spot. You're just trying to figure out, okay, we talk biomechanics, neurology, but you're dealing with a human being in front of you, and at least in a clinic.
Yeah.
So I can't attempt to engage that human being in front of me with whatever knowledge I may believe in that I think I've got, if I don't know how to interact with the person and address what might be needed. And I don't have to do the therapy and fix them.
Yeah.
It's not for me to tell a person that they should or shouldn't. It's up to them how to be. But if I'm reading what I'm seeing and this person's like, I'm in pain. Okay, well, where does it hurt? No, you don't understand. It hurts so much. It's like, well, but what hurts? Like, oh, but yeah, I had pain last week. And I'm like, they don't tell you, because they want you to know that they're suffering. That's the most important thing, is I am in pain. And that pain might actually be their husband's not treating them well, or their wife, or their boss, or they're just unhappy in life, or whatever. Hence the long text message you got. It's her telling you, I'm suffering.
Yeah.
Doesn't want you to tell her it's going to be all right.
Yeah.
Probably. I'm speculating. I didn't mean her. She just needs someone to acknowledge her suffering.
Yeah. And that's the thing when you're looking at things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs there, like that's the pendulum swing the other way, right? As much as we have a need for certainty, there is also a need for uncertainty and variety and excitement. Yes. And so, like, when you people often, and this is maybe another tangent for another day, but like when people go on to things like, I'll be happy when X. I'll be happy when my neck pain goes away. I'll be happy when I achieve a six-pack. I'll be happy when I get the promotion. And in reality, you just switch one problem for another.
No, in most cases, most people won't be. We're all trying to fill different voids and fulfill certain needs. And if we've made our happiness dependent on a certain thing, it essentially doesn't exist. We're not going to find it. This is getting into something much bigger.
But
so I was going to say that the pendulum thing just reminded me again, like the last thing in my career where the pendulum swung and I had to pull it back again, as I went from thinking I can fix anything to I moved to Dubai, and it's just a different variety of people here, different culture. Like, so my people skills were not up to scratch. They were not. I wasn't reading people very well. I was just having people that weren't happy more often than I was expecting. I was like, why don't I understand what's going on? When I started to get into this and read a few books, I was like, wait, everything's psychological. Then it was like, why am I even bothering? I can't fix anything. This has nothing to do with me. You just need to all go fix your heads. For me, it was like, on this side. Now I'm just like, look, they come to you. There's an emotional interaction from that. Let that be. Just be aware, be alert, and then you got to play it by ear. You still got to put your hands on someone. You still got to advise some kind of physical stretch, exercise, rehab, whatever. You're going to do your thing. You're aware that sometimes there's a bigger thing at hand that you can't. You're aware that sometimes you just can't help someone because there are variables that are not within your control. And you start to weigh that up. You start to find your middle ground. I don't know what the next pendulum is going to be for me, but that was a big one. I really, for about a year, was like, why am I even trying?
I've gone through many of those. I remember it's very interesting. You say there's been a lot of parallels in the last 10, 15 minutes of this chat where, there's a lot of things that resonate. You talk about that sort of need for certainty, and sometimes they don't want someone to say, you tell you it's going to be bad. You want someone to basically just almost be like, oh, yeah, that's fine. And it just reminded me, like, I'm very much often that, and the anxiety for me comes from that need for certainty. Like I've been in jobs that I've not liked for way too long for fear of the uncertainty of what can out there when I leave, despite how many people tell me I'll do all right. And lo and behold, I've been all right, But I had a very similar thing today, and it was interesting you brought this up. It's slightly gross, but I had reason why I went to the doctor, got my ADHD diagnosed, was I had a toenail thing that was like, is this fungal? And I was panicking myself, thinking, if that's a mole, if I've got skin cancer, and I was sitting there like shaking this doctor's surgery, nervous, anxious. Went in, got my blood pressure taken through the Richter scale. Doesn't help, I'm addicted to coffee, have white collar syndrome, and I'm nervous, right? So off the Richter scale, I go to blood pressure. And the doctor came in, had a look at it, and he did the best thing for me and how I'm wired that he could have ever done. He looked, he sniggered, he went, "That's not why you were worried, was it?" And I went, "Yeah." It's like, yeah, of course it's fine. And that level of almost borderline taking the piss was exact. So if he went, "Oh, well, yeah, I think it's probably going to be okay, but we'll look into it just to make sure," I would have sat home, got home and got nervous, and it would have been useless. He went, "Yeah, fine. Don't worry about it. That's stupid." And I needed that. That was the certainty brought back into my life that I didn't have when I started to worry about this thing. Yeah. And it was amazing how that I could have got the two doctors who told me the same thing. It's fine. One of them would have gone, "We'll just get some further tests to be sure." And the other one went, "No, don't be silly." I would have had a completely different result of how I left that surgery.
Imagine now another patient with the exact same thing, just a different personality comes in, and you tell them everything's fine. That person goes away and gets worse.
Yeah.
That person wants you to tell them that, no, it's okay. Yeah, this is the worst one I've seen this week. Either that doctor.
You have to take the toe off, get rid of that. Yeah.
Sometimes I say things like this. Maybe it sounds not very professional, but I say things almost in a slapstick sense, like, "How bad is it? Is it really bad?" Yeah, we'll just chop your arm off. You're probably not going to last another couple of weeks. I got sometimes it depends on the person, but sometimes I just go to the extreme. But it's I'm not saying anyone should do that. It probably just matches my personality, so maybe it just comes out right.
I'm a bit like that too.
but yeah, if you joked about chopping your toe off, and maybe initially you got scared, and then you realize how much of a joke he's making out of you, like, right, you're not worried at all, no, whatever. We learn in mostly what we're taught in university before you graduate is about reassuring people. It's as if every patient is coming to you for reassurance, with probably like maybe 10-20% of people really want your reassurance, but 80-90% don't want that. 80-90% would just be, "Fix me. I want to tell me you can get me better, but mainly acknowledge my pain."
Yeah.
My pain's the same as everyone else. No, my pain, because we all think our problem's worse than everyone else's. It's just like, that's our egos. That's how we are. That's how everyone more or less likes to think, that their problem's unique. We're different. My thing's different. No one understands me. But no one will ever understand you except you. Like, truly, no one lives the life that you have. Should we say the perception and consciousness?
I was going to use exactly the word perception.
Only your own, yeah. Like, I can never go into your consciousness. I can only exist as a part of your consciousness, and vice versa. So you can't presume too much, but you can just look at a person coming in and say, "Look, maybe if I just loosely have a look at what possible emotional need could you have as well as your physical need, and whether I'm in the gym with someone or whether I'm in, I could be treating someone, whatever. You could just be having a conversation. We could be having a conversation right now. Like, you invited me on here, so presumably you want me to talk about something. But let's say, like, if I don't know, maybe we're having just a conversation over a coffee, and I'm telling you about my problem, and then you said, "No, I had this really bad problem. It's even worse." Boom. How many times have you told someone you had a problem and they just told you about their problem? Yeah, this is
never works.
On this as well. I've tried to eliminate things like this. I've changed as much as I can. I'm changing behaviors like this. So what does it mean? It's like that person's not necessarily being compassionate. That person wants their level of significance or need for significance. They're trying to place above yours. It's like, yeah, you think yours was bad. Try thinking about how bad mine was. You'll never know how each of you felt in your own minds. You can't.
Yeah, and it would say perception is the right word, right? Because what is stressful to me might not phase you, and what would cripple you, I might not find stressful at all. And it's completely individual. And so the one thing I always try to remind myself is I'm in no place to judge anyone else's stress. I'm there to just understand.
What you've got though is a scenario where, let's say you take that mindset, you take a sense of compassion towards people, and you're looking for the best way you can help somebody, but at the same time you can't be responsible for that person's emotions. At the same time you have to decide, like, I'm a personal trainer, I've got a job to do, you're paying me for my services, my job is to deliver said services. You want to get leaner, bigger, stronger, fitter, feel good, healthy, whatever. I'm going to tell you these are the steps that we need to take together. This is your commitment that I need, and here's my commitment. And if you can't fulfill your end of the commitment, I'm going to understand you, but I also have to know where to draw the line and create my boundaries. It's like, look, I appreciate you might be going through X, Y, Z, and you're having a bad neck, whatever else. But I need you to be here 4 days a week and commit to the program. Otherwise, I can't be expected to get you the result. The moment you find yourself crossing that line where you're becoming your patient's or your client's therapist, and you're basically you're giving them what they want or what they need, and if you want to, you can. But you guys sound like this. How does that play impact on your life and your health and your energy as well? Do you go home drained and exhausted because you're therapizing everybody that comes in?
And you become a rent-a-friend, right? And in the same way that we spoke earlier on about therapy is something that people need to be ready to do. In the same way that me like dieting is hard at times. Sometimes you don't want to do it. And if I was like every time just told you what you wanted to hear in that moment, you'd never get there. There are times where it's going to be like, yeah, I get it's hard, but this is the expectation you set. This is what you need to achieve to get here. And we'll find some strategies, but I'm very much like this or that. So it's like, okay, you're having this issue. Option A or option B. We're not negotiating on the goal that you set, but the approach to get there is how you do it.
Managing expectations from the start. If a patient comes to me and says, what can happen here? I'm like, well, you can get better, you can get worse, or nothing will change. That's straight up, just by saying like, these are three things. You may get the results we want if we can stick to the entire plan. You may get less than the results you want depending on how much we deviate from the plan. I can offer you X, Y, and Z in the support of you reaching it. I need from you A, B, and C. The communication parameters. But the problem is, the problems that arise that I can look on myself, my clinical, my career, is they come from you. You're a human as well. So you go in on a bad day. You've had an argument with your wife or your friend or family or someone, or you've just whatever. Anything could be going on in your mind that day. Some days you're more compassionate. Some days you're less compassionate. But what drove you to be a trainer in the first place? You take something from that job. You might be a trainer that gets more from the connection you get with people. You might be a trainer that gets more from the feeling of educating people. You might get more from the sense of what you gain in your personal growth. It might be that it's the significance I think for a lot of people in this industry, it's significance. I think I'm a trainer because I get a sense of power around these people. You always hear that odd trainer in a commercial gym I heard one a couple of months back. It drove me nuts. I was just trying to do my workout and some guy training a young kid. And I'm thinking, are you coaching this kid or are you coaching everybody in this gigantic gym here? Like he was speaking so loudly, calling out, this kid must have been about 12. And he was coaching him he's doing a shoulder press, a seated shoulder press. And he cued him with maybe 30 different cues in one set, talking about the center of gravity. I'm like, center of gravity in the middle of a set with a 12-year-old. I'm like, look, I think, maybe I'm being judgmental, but you're more interested in how you're perceived in the gym and maybe myself or whoever's nearby listening to you coaching this kid than you're actually worried about the quality of coaching for this kid. So, this is the world we live in, and that's that's people. But we also have to see it in ourselves because we've all got traits of that. Yeah. I'm pointing the finger at him now, but I can look back. If someone came into the clinic and said to me, someone, it happened one time. I know this is a moment of self-reflection. Someone came in last year who referred to me from a friend who's a ex-professional strongman, and then he said, I said, oh, so yeah, such and such obviously told you, because this patient was some big dude, right? So I was like, oh, so yeah, such and such told you that I'm a powerlifter, right? And he's like, no. And I was like, he didn't say that. For some reason in my head, I was like, most of the trainers who send people in have told them, oh yeah, go see Hassan. He's a chiropractor, but he's also a powerlifter. Like for some reason, and I was like, why am I thinking that? No, I think at that time it was after my surgery. I dropped a lot of weight. I wasn't feeling as good in myself. I probably wasn't feeling so secure. I normally wouldn't care or have to think about it because I felt my own presence was going to bring a certain level of respect or status. And now I'm suddenly like 10 kilos down and I'm feeling skinny. And this guy came to me from another big guy came to me from another big guy, and he wasn't prior informed that I too was once a very strong lifter. And I just was like, okay, registered in my own head, why do I feel so compelled to tell him how strong I used to be, or what I used to lift, or let him know that I'm also a powerlifter? Like, this has nothing to do with his appointment. He's coming here to get treatment. He couldn't matter at all.
Yeah.
He hasn't asked. But it's a moment. You just, if you start looking, you start catching yourself. He's like, when and what moments do I feel like I have to gain some edge of significance or recognition? You know, and in the context of what you're doing, it's like, I'm here to provide a service to help someone with their health. What's this got to do with anything?
Yeah.
So when you catch yourself, you can have a think. So, well, why is it important? That's what got me to realize I'm feeling insecure, or at that moment that I don't feel good in my body. So I started to became aware to an extent of that. So I'm now a little bit more centered with myself. And going forwards, I can see my behavior a little bit more clearly. I start to realize, I've probably related too much of my sense of self-worth to powerlifting. So you asked me at the beginning, who are you? This, you know how you said the podcast always come back? That was like the first thing you said. And I was like, that's a deep philosophical question. Who am I?
Yeah.
Who are you? Like, you're not a powerlifter because that's something you do. You know, you're not a personal trainer. That's just a job.
Yeah, that didn't see what that's hit the nail on the head again of something that really resonates with me, and something I battled with a lot in the last year in the sense of, you know, working for a global brand, a world leader in the industry that we were at, and I running education there in multiple countries, and you leave, and I didn't realize quite how much of that part of that my identity that was, and in the sense of how much of a bubble it was, in the sense that when I come out, no one knows who I am. I'm a nameless person on Instagram, and the knock to my ego in those first few months was astronomical, because it was like, oh, I built myself up, my ego up on people who knew who I am based off. I worked within the same company, within a branch, built up a little bit of reputation.
You gain significance from that association to an elite brand. So it gave you a sense of a status, right? I won't lie, being part of that company was also a boost to my ego and status, and enjoyed that. You know, when I moved to Dubai, I was like, I used to work here and no one's heard of the company. Well, I mean, some people have, but at least they'd only just moved to Dubai around the same time. So it wasn't like, it's not a household name here like it was in the UK. So with all the trainers I knew in the UK and all the people that added me on Facebook, just because I was associated with the UP, it was like, yeah, I'm the man. I work for UP. Yeah. So, maybe not the same extent that you felt, but I can relate that. Like,
yes.
Anything that feeds your ego is going to make you feel good. And the more dependent you are on those things to make you feel good, the more of a hit you're going to take when they're gone.
Exactly. And I think it was something that I very much needed, because it was like, I was, there almost 8 years. And that's the majority of my 20s is where most of my adult life, in a way, where I developing who I was as a person has built up around that feeling. And then you sort of leaves that environment, and I almost needed it to go, okay, maybe I had put too much of my identity into one sort of thing. I love that I was obsessive about my career and learning, being better. But you look back and go, wow, when I don't have that ego boost, I don't have that people around me that know me from my networks, like similar thing to you said a second ago, who are you? And that's that chance then, it's like, right, this is an opportunity to reinvent myself and make more of myself and learn these things about myself that I'm noticing, that when I want to try and throw a bit of significance out there, and I check myself a lot more this year than,
you're going to find out. The more therapy you do, the more answers you're going to get. As long as you're a good therapist, obviously. You just have to iron out all these toxic beliefs that you don't even know you're holding. The things that
until you get a pattern break, which is me leaving that company last year, or something, or insert life event here, like you mentioned. That pattern break that makes you go, oh, I noticed that again. You
don't have to crash into the wall to realize that you're traveling at high speed in the direction of a wall, and you can see in the distance that that's a very familiar wall. You've hit that one before.
Yeah.
And if you just keep blaming the wall, you were like, well, I have a choice to slow down or go in a different direction. But, it's like, if it's always the wall's fault.
Yeah. Yeah.
you do your therapy, and you ideally you go into it just trying to understand why you are the way you are. It should be non-judgmental, just like in terms of like no self-judgment, and just see, just observe. You become an observer. Actually, I give you a recommendation to you or anybody listening. My favorite book that I've read in recent years is called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Joe Dispenza.
Have you ever done these personality tests? That's really interesting. You know, like the insight on you. It's free. Yeah, Dispenza. Yeah, I know Dispenza.
I honestly, it's like this, that there were a handful of books I started going through, and I just didn't really click with many of them. I didn't finish any of them. I didn't like too much of the wishy-washy or like the hippie stuff, talking about the universe and manifesting. And then in the end, when I came across Dispenza, is the language he used. It was scientific. It was logical. To me, it made sense. It was like all, I don't know what you call left brain. And now I've listened to that on audio, because the best way that I absorb information is driving the car and sticking someone on audio. So I've gone through that.
With your hand at the bottom of the wheel, and both feet on the pedal.
That's how I drive. My hands are on the bottom of the wheel. I don't understand the people that stick their hand on the wheel. I tried 5 minutes and I got a stiff neck. I can't do it. Yeah, that book just made sense of everything. It made sense of the therapy that I was already doing. I understood why it worked so well. I understood what it was about it that was working. I started to, and the best thing, basic thing that came out of the book, it's better to go through the book, because I tell you what it is now, the appreciation for it won't be the same, but becoming an observer of yourself. In any moment that's emotionally charged, or you feel yourself saying something in your head or reacting or repeating a thought or a phrase, just the moment being able to, it's a skill. It takes some practice, but it doesn't take forever, and it gets better very quickly. But you just take a moment to step back and go, wait, okay, why am I feeling what I'm feeling? Where did that thought come from? If something goes wrong, and I don't know, say you go in the gym, you got injured, you're like, God, and something was bound to go wrong. You hear yourself say something like that. You're like, 1 second, that's your first thought that comes out of your subconscious. Like, so why did I think something had to go wrong? When have I known? When was the last time I remember something was bound to go wrong? When's the first time I can remember something had to go wrong? You just start asking little questions. You might not figure out every answer, but it just gets you reflecting and just start noticing things. And you notice your own patterns more easily. But if you live this kind of illusion of your conscious, the dream that you live within, that's your consciousness, and you don't take a moment to try and step out of it, you can't see things that way. That book would change a lot of lives if everybody would listen to it. And even if you want to go towards law of attraction and the concepts of like manifesting, he gives you a very scientific, in the quantum level, explanation of things like this. So you can take it on board or not. It doesn't really matter. The bottom line is you'll learn something about how and why behavior patterns occur, and how you observe yourself, and how you can actually start to implement a change if you want to. But it's just like, at least I can see it, open my eyes and actually show me what's going on. Yeah. You can't unsee, when you read the book, you can't unsee that stuff. You can't unhear it. It's like the Matrix with the red pill and the blue pill. For me, it was at least like that.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. That's definitely on to read list. But I could certainly sit here chatting about psychology, training, mobility for hours. But I'm very conscious here that it's getting close to 3 a.m. You have a short feeding window, and I don't want to take all of that time away from you. So this has generally been one of my favorite episodes. I normally go long, but this is probably one of the longer ones, and it's worth every second of it. So for people who want to learn more about you and what you do, how can people find Hassan?
Well, you can find me on Instagram at Performance Doctor. It's one word, Performance Doctor. And if you're in Dubai, I work at Adria Medical Center in Jumeirah, so feel free to come by for a consult if you want any questions answered or anything assessed. And that's basically the main 2 areas. I'm not so big on social media as much as I used to be, but I'm probably going to start putting a little bit more content out over this year, at least. It's my intention to start doing a bit more educational stuff like I used to.
I very much look forward to it. Looking back at some of your old educational content, I was remembering how good it actually was going in, through the prep of this video, and some of the videos you did and some of the posts on Facebook. So that's definitely a treat for anyone that's worthwhile. But thank you so much for your time. Really, really enjoyed it.
Well, I've enjoyed doing this podcast, I think, more than anything. definitely the longest one I've done, but I haven't got bored during this. I've enjoyed this more than I thought I would as well.
Thank you very much. I really, really appreciate that.
Thank you for having me.
Anytime.